Okay, lunch is about over, although I think there's still some food over there, so please help yourself. I want to welcome you back to our presentation here. Hope everyone got a chance to step outside onto the deck, and I know some folks were going over closer to the field out behind me, but hopefully we get a chance to do that as well later. All right, so it's my honor to bring up our next speaker. We have Dale Sanders, who's the President of Technology for HealthCatalyst, who's going to do his own introduction. So with that,
okay. Am I mic'd up?
You are mic'd up.
Okay,
all right.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sharing your time and all that sort of thing. I normally take a 15-minute combat nap after lunch. So if I do that today, somebody please come on stage and wake me up. It's an honor to be here. I want to talk about raising the digital quotient of healthcare. That's kind of the theme today. And we'll jump into it. Here we go. Here's a little bit about my background, and it's kind of interesting. So I spent 15 years in the military-industrial complex where conflict leads to profits. Think about that for a second. That's how you make money in the military-industrial complex, through conflict. And I've been 21 years in the healthcare industrial complex where illness leads to profit. Kind of interesting. You'd think that my choices in the next phase of my career, I hope I'm a little more economically aware. I started my professional career after graduating from a tiny little school, Fort Lewis College, Durango, Colorado. That's my hometown. I've got a background in chemistry and biology. I went into the Air Force as a command control, communications, and intelligence officer, and I specialized in nuclear operations, nuclear warfare, nuclear decision-making, which sounds odd, but that was all about risk mitigation, risk identification, decision support in very critical, time-sensitive environments, and identifying false positives and false negatives and figuring out how to react to that. I also spent some time in space operations, which for the most part is taking care of satellites and orbiting vehicles for the most part. And that also played a part in how I look at healthcare data. I call it instrumentation of the payload was a big part of what we did in space operations, which is bathing those satellites and sensors about their telemetry. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I went on to work for a company called TRW, a big space and defense contractor that specialized in big decision-making environments and command centers, that kind of thing. Worked for the National Security Agency, where data analysis was critically important, including NLP. And the early days, this period was actually the first wave of artificial intelligence really taking off. So we were working with genetic algorithms, machine learning, all that sort of thing, NLP back in the 90s, funded by NSA. So I went through the hype and then the sort of the destruction of that hype and hope in the 90s when it didn't live up to what we all hoped it would. And again, that had an influence of how I approach things in healthcare. Took a little side trip in my career for 2 years, built the first enterprise data warehouse at Intel around logistics and supply chain management. Then I made this weird jump to be what, at the time, we didn't have a chief analytics officer or a chief data officer at Intermountain. So I was the chief data guy at Intermountain and regional director of medical informatics at LDS Hospital for a number of years. And then I went to Northwestern, where I was again the chief data guy. We built another data warehouse at that point based around Epic and Cerner. If you think about Intermountain, was a very proprietary information systems environment, so the data warehouse that we built there was very proprietary. But I had this notion that we should be able to commercialize the development of these data warehouses. It shouldn't be everybody having to grow their own. So I took that notion with me to Northwestern, where we built a data warehouse around Epic, Cerner, IDX, eClinicalWorks, and at that time started laying the foundation for the commercialization of those concepts and the reuse started an organization called the Healthcare Data Warehousing Association to help encourage reuse. And then went on into a very interesting gig as CIO for the National Health System of the Cayman Islands, which, you know, for all the obvious reasons, that was a great thing. But what it really was a population health environment in a laboratory-sized island. So 60,000 people, very much public health and population health mashed together. The director and the head of public health was a member of our executive team on the hospital and clinical operations side of things. And the cool thing about the Cayman Islands is they managed to provide really solid health care, guaranteed health care for everyone that comes into the island, including the 1.5 million visitors. And there's also a commercial option if you want to buy higher level services, you want to buy more services from the US. And they do this in an environment that has no corporate income tax and no personal income tax. So the economics of it were fascinating as well. So it turned out to be, in addition to all the great things of the Cayman Islands, it turned out to be an awesome learning experience for me about what's possible in more innovative healthcare systems, especially around population health. And then finally, I formally joined HealthCatalyst in, 2011 or so. All of us that were at Intermountain that had this notion of commercializing what we did at Intermountain got back together again. And, so I went over to the dark side of being a vendor, essentially, and because I was kind of tired of always building these things on my own is what it boiled down to. So that's the story. And it's 2/3 random accidents and 1/3 planning at best. So there's just advice to the young that you don't really have to have a career plan. It can still work out okay. But, part of what I'd like to talk about today is preparing all of us, right, in HIMSS, preparing all of us for the digital future of healthcare and not being victims to it, driving it from what we are as health IT professionals, driving and accelerating the digitization of health, okay? And part of that includes how do we morph our own careers to facilitate that progression, but how do we have the conversation with executives in healthcare and administrators in healthcare who are largely ignorant of technology in general and certainly not conversant in the future of digital healthcare? What can we do with our careers? What can we do with the conversation to accelerate this and start spending our money in smart ways towards the digitization of health? So it's a great skill to have, but you don't have to be a coder to be successful in the future of this digitization. And there's a reflection of that in my background. So I was a coder. I was in the guts of code early in my career and all that kind of thing. So I certainly understand the concepts and the principles and things like that. But there seems to be some consistent value in my career in some interesting ways. I know the pros and cons, and I know what's probable and improbable with the technology that we're dealing with. So I don't necessarily have to be a coder in JavaScript or R or Python. I know enough about it, and I read about it, and I try to stay up to date about it. What I really do, though, is I study what's possible, what's impossible, what are the pros and cons of these environments and this technology, and what can we expect from it? And then I try to communicate that back into products and strategies and things for our clients. And the other thing that seems to work for me is being able to take an idea over here and move it over here. And I really think everybody has that capability. That's nothing unique about me. But I think if you open your mind to that and you look for those patterns, I think it's more likely to happen. Just constantly stay aware of what's in your environment, and when something is cool and working over here, look at it and think, what could we do and how could we apply it over here? And I always say there's no new ideas really in human life. All the ideas have been taken. It's just a matter of moving them around to different areas, okay? So speaking of skills, as measured by McKinsey, they have a really good framework for measuring the digital quotient of healthcare. And I would encourage all of you, if you work in a provider organization, if you work for a consulting firm, think about reading the work that McKinsey publishes on the digital quotient. They have there's a a nice little quadrant that shows the digitization as a comparison to change in post-tax profit margins. And as you can expect, healthcare is down in the very low left corner of this diagram. We're terribly inefficient at the digitization of care. The digital quotient that McKinsey talks about is a combination of three very simple concepts. It's data assets times data usage times the data skill set that you have. So if you take that back to your own organizations and your provider groups and just at a high level, ask yourself, what kind of assets do we have? How well are we using those assets? And what kind of labor do we have and skills do we have around data to make the most of it? So I would say that in general, we have to do our part in HIMSS to raise the digital quotient of not only our skill set, but especially the executives that are making decisions or not making decisions about the future of care. And I think it's up to all of us to do this, right? We have to have a sense of impatience, friends. We have to drive the transformation of healthcare. We have to be more insistent. We have to be more impatient about what's happening. Going back to my background in the military-industrial complex and healthcare and the whole economics of that, we all know how much we're spending as a percent of GDP on healthcare, right? Everybody pretty much knows. It's around 18%. How much do we spend as a percent of GDP on the military in the U.S.? Somebody shout out a number. 40%? It's 3.3%. You can Google that. You can check it out. It's 3.3%. That's what we spend on the military-industrial complex as a percent of our GDP. What was the Soviet Union spending as a percent of their GDP on their military-industrial complex when it collapsed? 18%. So we can cannibalize the economy through the military-industrial complex. We can cannibalize the economy through the healthcare-industrial complex, and that's what we're doing. One of the things that now we have about a 550 employee company, and the expenses that we have associated with healthcare are taking money out of our employees' pockets, Chase and Sam over there, and it's also taking money out of our clients' pockets because we pass those expenses on through our licensing fees. And we've got to reel the economics of this back in, and it's within our power to do that. We just have to be more insistent about it. We have to force it upon Congress and the payers to make a difference. Okay, so on to today's story here. Some of these cartoons are mine, some of them are not. The good ones are not mine. I've got some assertions, observations, et cetera, about data and digitization of healthcare. We'll talk about the attributes of a modern digital platform, the technical requirements of becoming digitized. And then I'll share a few thoughts on AI and precision medicine, okay? Before we go too much further, I just want to emphasize the importance of the soft skills of becoming digital and data-driven. If you haven't read this book by Daniel Pink, it's an awesome book. How many people have read it? A few. It's a great, simple book that describes what drives human behavior and human motives. It's a simple read, and it boils down to three very simple things: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. We all want to feel like we've mastered a skill. We want to be proud of that skill. We want to apply that skill. We have something that we belong to, that we hold on to, that we appreciate about ourselves and others appreciate about us. For the most part, we want to be left alone, and we want to be autonomous. We don't want to be micromanaged. We want to be in an environment that's supportive if we need help, that's nurturing if we need it, but for the most part, we want to be left alone. And we want to feel like we're a part of something larger than ourselves. We want to have a sense of team and mission and purpose, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So think about that as it relates to the current data strategy in healthcare. What are we doing, especially for physicians, that makes them feel like they're mastering their skills better than they are? To what degree are we addressing their sense of autonomy and their sense of purpose? And I would argue that our current data-driven strategy in healthcare is sucking the life out of physicians and their sense of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And we've got to stop it. Not to mention, we're not doing anything to speak of for patients in this context, right? What are we doing with the digitization of health that makes patients feel more masterful, more autonomous, and more purposeful about their health care. Almost nothing. It's non-existent. But we're certainly sucking the life out of physicians, and we've got to stop it. And this is something that's within our control. It's largely being driven by meaningful use. If you think about the origins of what's happening, it's being driven by meaningful use. Now, there's some good news. There is good news occasionally coming out of the Trump administration. Joke. But what CMS and CMA Vermin are doing, right, and AZAR, there's some good momentum around healthcare change. And one of those is the relaxing of this over-measurement of physicians. So I would say that our national data strategy right now is essentially a train wreck in healthcare, and we've lost our physicians. There's an article that came out in the New England Journal a couple of weeks ago about charting a path for improving performance measurement. And it was very interesting. The authors of the paper looked at the 271 measures in the quality payment program. They picked out 86 of those measures that seemed generally to relate to general internal medicine. And of those, 37% were totally invalid, 28% were questionable validity. So what does that do to a poor physician when 65%, is that right? Did I do my math right? Yeah. Of measures that they're being held accountable to are either completely invalid or partially invalid. We've got to stop the insanity. We've got to put a pause on what we're doing around measures as it relates to physicians. Another article that came out in the Annals of Internal Medicine just a few weeks ago talked about physician burnout and EHRs and what's happening. It's horribly sad. Physicians suffering, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes, to be honest with you. Physicians are suffering the highest rate of suicide of any professional group. It's twice the rate of the general population. And there's 50% burnout, greater than 50% burnout in all specialties right now. And I'll comment about this for just a second. I trace the origins of this back to meaningful use. I think that's when the train went off the tracks. When I went to Northwestern in 2006, Epic and Cerner were languishing. We weren't really using it on the campus to their full extent. Certainly nothing like what we did at Intermountain. So we, with David Leibovitz, my CMIO, and I sat down and we wrote up a one-page description called The Principles of EHR Utilization. One page. We limited it to one page. And we said, in general, these are the principles of how you should use this EHR that you have to its maximum value. It was a very simple document, but the principles were very sound. Then we built a dashboard that looked at the logs of Epic and Cerner, and we built each physician a dashboard that showed them how they were interacting with Epic and Cerner and how their peers were interacting with Epic and Cerner to show the utilization, the progression. So when we did that, the very simple first attempts really at meaningful use, it went hockey stick in terms of appropriate use of the EHRs. But whatever happened between those concepts of a simple one-page document and what became meaningful use is a mystery to me. And we've got to figure out how to reel that monster back in. Okay. Philosophically, I would suggest that quantitative predictability is the metric of scientific precision. Okay, think about it for just a second. Quantitative predictability is the metric of scientific precision. Another way to say that is the progression of any body of science is measured by its predictability. Okay? Any body of science, the measure of it is its predictability. And on the continuum of sciences, we kind of got sociology on the left side, we got physics on the right side. If you think about the predictability of physics, right, that's the sort of thing that allows you to sling a satellite into space and know exactly where it's going to be in, years from now. Predicting anything over on the left-hand side that's more human-oriented is pretty difficult. But all of us, have to progress medicine towards the right. And it's not the fault of medicine, it's complex, right? Anything to do with human beings is complex and hard to understand. But we have to start thinking about the digitization. If you think about what drove the predictability of engineering and physics, it was experimentation and observation and collecting data and folding that back into mathematical models that describe the event that just happened. And that's the same sort of thing that we need to do with medicine. We've got to collect more data. We have to observe that data. we have to try to start putting frameworks of mathematical models around that to progress this to the right. I bring this up for a couple of reasons, not only to stimulate progression to the right, but to remind everyone that we're not as predictable in healthcare as we like to sometimes believe, and we try to force that on physicians as if we were. And I always say there's three successes or attributes of success in healthcare data, any data. It's find the truth, tell the truth, and face the truth. And in a world of where everything is fake news right now, it's pretty interesting, right? This is a philosophy that I learned from years ago from a philosophy professor who taught a course, What is Truth? And in data, in healthcare, it's hard to find the truth because we're still in the middle of this continuum. If you do think you found the truth, or an approximation of it, you have to be careful about how you tell the truth. Because it can be offensive sometimes, and it can frankly be inaccurate. And then the last step in that, especially with physicians and others, is you have to help them face the truth and how to adapt to it. And that's the soft side of data. So it's find the truth, tell the truth, face the truth. And thinking about that as digital professionals is really important, because if you don't handle the soft side of this journey, the human side of this journey, all the technology in the world will go to waste. Okay, so this is the digital conversation that I would like to enable between a physician and their patient. Okay, it's a little lengthy, so hang with me here. This hangs in my office, by the way. As I read through this, you'll see that there are these subtle references to outcomes data, cost data, predictive analytics, machine learning, recommendation engines. Okay, so hang with me here. I'm going to violate all PowerPoint presentation rules by reading this. Okay, I can make a health optimization recommendation for you, informed not only by the latest clinical trials, but also by local and regional data about patients like you. The real-world health outcomes over time of every patient like you, and the level of your interest and ability to engage in your own care. All of that is going to go into my prediction for treatment and maintenance of you as a patient. In turn, I can tell you within a specified range of confidence which treatment or health management plan is best suited for a patient specifically like you and how much that will cost. All right, so behind that, there's machine learning, there's clinical trials data to the degree that it's valuable, there's local and regional data, there's patients like you, which is pattern recognition and AI, there's outcomes data, there's another pattern recognition of patients like you, that's personalized care and precision medicine, level of interest, patient activation measures, social determinants of health. Ability to engage is again back to social determinants of health data. Range of confidence indicates upper and lower boundaries of statistical confidence, again machine learning. And treatment and best suited, so that's treatment predictions, again predictive algorithms and pattern recognition, that's best suited for you, personalized care and precision care, and how much it will cost. The last part is very important, is how much it will cost. Okay, that's the conversation, and if anybody has a less wordy version of that that's better, I'd love to, because then I could actually memorize it. I would love for you to suggest it, but I think it's something like that, right, friends? I think that's pretty much what we're after. Okay, and I want to give credit to the learning health community for inspiring it. This is my version of that work, and if you're not familiar with the learning health community, it's a good conceptual framework to think about the future of healthcare. Okay, so what's required to become digitized? First of all, it's thinking about this notion of the digital twin. The digital twin, for the most part, being a patient, and again, it's all about predictability. Okay, so the first step in any industry is you have to digitize the assets that you're trying to manage. Think about UPS, FedEx, Amazon, the digitization of all the assets that they manage and move around and track, okay? And then you have to digitize the production of the process of moving and interacting and managing and optimizing those assets. So digitize the asset, digitize the production process associated with those assets. In the aircraft world now, aircraft are bathed in sensors. Bathed in sensors. So the aircraft itself, from manufacturing to flight, has hundreds and hundreds of sensors on it. That's the digitization of the asset. The production is air traffic control digitization, baggage handling, ticketing, maintenance, manufacturing. That's the process. Same kind of concept in patients. We have to digitize the patient, and we have to digitize the process associated with those patients, the production system. And I would argue that we haven't digitized the patient, and we've only digitized a clinical encounter to drop a bill. That's what we've done. Where's the most digital environment for a patient in today's world? The ICU. The ICU is the most digital environment for patients in healthcare today. Now we've got to figure out how to take that digitization and the sensors in the ICU, move it out of the four walls of healthcare, and expose patients and expose the ecosystem to something beyond the traditional 3 encounters per year that we see in healthcare. It's a digital sampling problem. Now, this is kind of shocking, but it's true. And in fact, I think EHRs hold even less than 8% of the data that we need for precision medicine and personalized care. And a lot of people scoff at this, but it's actually, there's an analysis behind this. I was involved in a project in Alberta, Canada, in their precision medicine and population health initiative, and we calculated this as quantitatively as we could. But you can get to a pretty low number on the back of an envelope. And when you think about it, only 20% of the factors affecting health outcomes fall inside the traditional healthcare delivery system. Social determinants of health, genomics, lifestyle, those have a bigger impact on health outcomes, quality of life, length of life, than what we do in traditional healthcare delivery. But we have no data in the rest of that environment. So you can quickly see that we're missing a big chunk of data, the dark matter of data about patients' lives that exist outside the healthcare system. So that trims the data down enormously. Then on average, we only see a clinical encounter as a patient 3 times per year in the US. I'm lucky in that I don't have to see the doctor very often. So there's almost no digital understanding of me as a patient at places like Intermountain Healthcare in Salt Lake City. Very little understanding. We're missing data on 362 days of the year, essentially, is what it amounts to. And you could argue that the data that we collect on those 3 encounters is largely qualitative, not quantitative, okay? The interesting thing is we collect almost no data on healthy patients. But yet, from an artificial intelligence perspective, we should be modeling those AI models against the role model of healthy patients. How is a patient healthy and why? And we should be applying AI and learning from those and applying it back to the patients that are seeking treatment. So we don't have a good training set for the healthy outcome and the healthy patient because we're not collecting any data on it. I have this dream of someday opening a healthcare system and offering gigantic discounts, if not free healthcare, just for a patient's willingness to contribute their data to the ecosystem. Okay. The simple ultimate analytic goals that we should all be pursuing is around these 2 questions. What was the cost per unit of health outcome achieved for this patient? How much money did we have to invest in this patient to boost their healthcare outcome, their quality of life, their length of life, et cetera? How much did we have to invest in that? What were those investments? And then how can we apply that to the next patient? And so on. The second question is, what are the precise personal interventions that will maximize the outcome and minimize the cost? So it's not just understanding the cost per unit of health outcome achieved ratio, it's what can we do for the next patient or for this patient to intervene and maximize the outcome and minimize the cost. Fundamentally, we have to start collecting outcomes data and we have to have more precise cost data, right? We don't know what our true costs are, especially at the per patient level. Our cost accounting systems in healthcare are smeared averages. We don't really have the precise data to understand how much money was invested in me to achieve a better outcome as a patient. So we have to have more precise cost accounting data. And for heaven's sakes, we have to have more outcomes data. And why we aren't collecting outcomes data is beyond me. Every provider system in the country should make PROMIS a part of their standard process for treating patients. Patient satisfaction is not even remotely close to what we need for capturing and understanding patient outcomes around physical health, mental health, and social health. PROMIS, thanks to my old friends and colleagues at Northwestern, it's well validated, it's clinically valid, it's available, it's open to be used, and we're not using it as a healthcare system. And there's cultural resistance to it that we need to overcome. There's really no technical resistance to it. Every time there's a clinical encounter, we should be pushing out a PROMIS survey to a patient, tailored to their condition and need. Speaking of patient engagement, and I don't have any data to back this up other than observation, but notice here, oh, I gave it away, didn't I? Notice that she's giving the engagement ring back, okay? That's foreshadowing what I'm about to say. About 2/3 of patients don't want or can't be engaged. That's my observation, and I bet if someone would study this, I bet I'm not far off with that estimate. About 2/3 of patients don't want or cannot be engaged. Don't want is back to the sense of autonomy, right? For the most part, leave me alone in life. If I need help, I'll ask for it. But there are patients that can't be engaged for various reasons, economically, cognitively, geographically. They can't be engaged. So no matter how much you want to engage those who don't want to be or those who can't be, you're going to sink money into a lost cause, and you may even drive patients away. What patients really want, I would argue what most of us really want, is when we're sick, we want to be treated safely, affordably, personally, efficiently, and precisely. When we need help, we want to ask for it, and we want to expect an experience that looks like that. And I think we have to all keep in mind, care management is a good example. We're all kind of in love with care management. We have a care management product suite at HealthCatalyst. We've sunk a lot of money into it. Is it really going to help patient engagement or not? I'm not convinced. I think it's leading to overdiagnosis and overtreatment. I think we're engaging for the sake of engagement when a lot of patients don't really care. So I would be very deliberate about this as a national strategy as well as a provider strategy about how we engage and when we choose to engage with patients. Okay, there's clear trajectory that we're all starting to own our own care more and more. Interesting study came out not long ago from a group in the Netherlands who asked what's the rate of patient requests for a specific therapeutic or diagnostic intervention. We sense that there's an increase in patient requests for specific treatment, but we're not sure. So they studied from 1985 to 2014 these requests and the interactions with clinicians. And what they saw was a significant increase in requests by patients for therapeutic interventions and significant increase in compliance with those requests by general practitioners. So there's a trajectory that's starting to happen with patients owning their own care. When I was teaching, I went back into teaching at Northwestern after being out of it for a long time. And in the time that I'd been out of it, they'd wired the classrooms with wireless connectivity. So all the students suddenly had laptops in my classes. And before, nobody had a laptop. And I thought they were all taking notes. Right? What were they doing? They were Googling everything I said. They were double-checking everything that I said. And I had a momentary panic attack in my first lecture when I realized that was what was happening. And I was like, I've got to really watch what I say, and I've got to engage this because this is a new form of learning. This is not the superior professor that can't be challenged anymore. This is a joint learning environment, and that's what we have to enable. So next time you go to a clinical encounter with your physician, walk in with a laptop. All right? We've got to do that. We've got to do it. We're doing it now. We just don't bring the laptop in. We Google it offline, but we're too embarrassed to bring the laptop into the exam room. Doctors out there, you're going, are you kidding me? Sorry, guys, but it's going to happen. So interesting, blood tests went up by 2x. Requests for blood tests went up 2x during that time frame. This one was interesting, 26 increase in requests for a urine test. That one is odd. I don't know why, I don't know what that's all about. Requests for radiology and imaging went up 2.4 times, and medication only went up 1.2, which I thought was interesting. I expected the numbers to be higher for medication requests, but as it turns out, everybody wants a urine test. So, interesting, at least in the Netherlands. So here's what I think the future of diagnosis and treatment looks like. It will be enabled by biointegrated sensors, just like, was it Dr. Combs at MC10? It was on earlier. Biointegrated sensors, and patients are going to hold more data about themselves in the healthcare system. So we're going to see a shift in knowledge and power from the healthcare system to the patient. It's going to happen, and we've got to accelerate it. Their data, our data, is going to be constantly updated through these sensors and uploaded to a cloud. Algorithms are going to diagnose our condition, calculate a composite health risk score, and recommend treatments and maintenance plans. We're not that far from being able to do this. We're a long ways from being able to do it precisely. We're not far from being able to do this technically. All we've got to do is round out the precision. Then the algorithm is going to suggest a best fit care provider. And it's also going to suggest other patients like me that I can interact with socially. And they will become a part of the care team. The patient will then engage with their care provider, enabled by this AI output. It's going to dramatically shift the conversation. And there's my highly sophisticated diagram of this system in operation with only 4 arrows. So that's how simple it's going to be. So we're not that far away from this, friends. We really aren't. We're a little ways away from precision. We're not that far away from the capability, okay? But back to precision. AI needs breadth and depth of data in the domain. That's common no matter what the domain, right? I learned this at NSA. It certainly applies to healthcare. And this is what I would argue is our joint strategic acquisition roadmap for data, okay? I've been carrying this cartoon around for about 10 years now. And all of us, either as a provider or a vendor, should be asking, what are we going to do to round out the data that's available for that patient in the center? Because for the most part, we're stuck down in the lower left quadrant of this diagram. And by the way, it's happening only 3 times per year. We've got to drive the development of biometric and biointegrated devices. We've got to start incorporating patient-reported outcomes. Consumer data, Facebook messed that all up. So we may not be doing anything with consumer data for a while. Socioeconomic data is a no-brainer. We should be doing that. Genomics data is at our fingertips. Geisinger just announced, right, that they're going to provide a DNA sequence for all patients now, free of charge. Every patient now will be sequenced. And then the pioneer areas of epigenetics and the microbiome. So lay this out on a timeline for your organization and ask yourself, when are we going to have this data and what's our strategy to get to it? Okay? To illustrate, this is a picture of me. I'm a late-in-life father. That's my little girl and little boy on her first day of preschool this year. That's my real life. But this is healthcare's digital view of my life. Healthcare knows very little about who I really am. Okay? We got to round out the precision, friends. We have to round it out. Dust off your old physics and wherever else, I don't know, where you information system, computer engineering classes, and remember digital sampling. So there's Harry Nyquist, kind of the father of digital sampling concepts. We're an analog creature. Human beings are an analog signal. We're an analog creature. We move and we operate fluidly. If we're going to understand who we are, we have to sample that analog waveform more often. Okay? And we can't possibly provide personal health or precision medicine with only 3 patient data samples per year. We can't do it. And if you think about what we've done to physicians and the EHR, we've made physicians the digital sampler of healthcare with click after click after click after click after click. That's what amounts to our digital sampling strategy in healthcare, and we've got to stop it. We all have to adopt the hashtag no more clicks. No more clicks. And until we do that, we're not going to drive the development of sensors and participation and contribution of data into the ecosystem. We're going to keep shoveling it on top of physicians. We have to say right now, no more clicks, and drive the instrumentation of the patient and the patient's contributions to that system. We like to think we're big data in healthcare, but we're not. A Boeing 787 collects 500 gigabytes of data per 6-hour flight, and it's all about the health and maintenance of that aircraft. Conceptually, it's the exact same thing that we're trying to understand with patients. But we only collect an average of 100 megabytes per patient per year in healthcare right now. That's a few songs. So we talk about being highly digital and big data in healthcare. We're not. We're barely scratching the surface. Now, granted, that number does not include digital imagery. Digital imagery is a different category of data. A little harder to analyze, a little harder to make sense of. This is more discrete data that we can analyze and compute easily that I'm talking about. But there is hope, okay? MC10 that was described earlier. There are sensors and there are diagnostics that are starting to emerge. And I would suggest if you don't know anything about John Rogers and the work that he's accomplishing at Northwestern and the Center for Biointegrated Electronics, follow him and his team, and not only follow him, but prop them up as national heroes. What they're doing is phenomenal. It's really Renaissance science. It's amazing what they're doing. This is a picture of John and a couple of his grad students I took to memorialize my meeting with them a couple of weeks ago. I'm just saying, you guys are going to change healthcare. You're going to pivot the healthcare industry with what you're doing. So they have, among the things that the products that they are designing and producing, they have microns thin, 1-inch square, skin pliable sensors that have a Bluetooth antenna, a CPU, physiologic monitors, and wireless power, all in this wafer. And when you see what it can do to babies in the NICU, you'll see what's possible. Those poor little babies in a NICU that are wired up and don't have any opportunity to interact with their mother have a much higher mortality rate than those who have the ability to be hugged, cared for, and nurtured and bonded with their mothers. These sensors remove all those tethers. So those little babies in the NICU at Northwestern can be picked up and loved and treated in a way that they never could before. And that's just the beginning of what's possible. There's a picture of John. He hates this. He's an incredibly humble guy. But what this shows is they're not stopping at the surface with wafers. They want these to eventually become tattoos. That's how thin and integrated it will be. By the way, some of these sensors can be placed directly on organs internally as well. Okay, so there is hope. It's coming, friends. We just have to encourage it. Which brings me to what I would advocate today if I were still a practicing CIO, and I'm going to do as best I can as a vendor, is what I call the rise and the creation of the digitician and patient data profiles. Different patient types have different data profiles required for their active management and maximizing their outcomes in health. Okay? A CHF patient has a different data profile about maximizing their outcomes than a total knee, for example, right? It's a different data profile. We need to start building out those data profiles. And by the way, I'm not talking about quality measures here. I'm talking about instrumentation of the patient, telemetry about the patient that's tailored to their condition and the goals that we have for their outcomes, okay? It's about the state of the patient, not about the state of the process. It's about the state of the patient. It's going to take a while for John Rogers and his team and other innovative folks to build these sensors. In the meantime, if I were a CIO, still practicing CIO, I would start creating a skill and labor category within my organization, and I would call it a digitician. And that digitician's job is to sit between the patient and the physician and the care team, and their job as a digitician is to proactively round out these patient data profiles as best we can with whatever means we have right now while these sensors progress in their development. You can think of it as an extension of the traditional care management plan, but it's about digital data management and analytics and feeding that back to the patient, feeding that back to the care team, and not necessarily in the form of traditional reports, right? It's in decision support for both the patient and the care team, not just conference room analytics, but embedded decision support. So, by the way, I really like that digitician name. I thought it was very creative, so I get great pleasure in that. It took me a while to figure out how to pronounce it, actually. It didn't roll off my tongue. Okay, let's talk about the attributes of a modern digital platform for just a second. I would suggest that as computer scientists, we overlook the last and critically important layer in the technology stack. If you think about what the public cloud has done to hardware and operating systems, it's incredible, right? What you can spin up in an afternoon in AWS, Azure, and Google, it's incredible. If you think about the progression we've made with application development, tools like Angular and D3, all the work in JavaScript, software engineering today is so much better than when I was growing up in it. And of course, you can talk about iOS and Android at the operating system level, the user interfaces with our phones. Everything in this stack is orders of magnitude better than it's ever been before. But what we've forgotten, and it's still very hard for application developers to figure out how to manage and wrangle the data layer. And it's especially complicated in healthcare. Managing and interacting with the data layer in healthcare is very difficult. And so if we don't make it easier to manage that layer and interact with it, all those brilliant minds that are writing all these cool applications are going to fail because there simply isn't enough time and money for them to bring their products to market if they have to wrangle with the data layer that they currently have to. So that was the inspiration behind this thing that we call at HealthCatalyst a data operating system. I'm not selling HealthCatalyst today, friends. That is not at all my style. So all I'm talking about is what I think everyone should be doing. So you can call it whatever you want, but it's this middle layer of platform of curated, aggregated data that makes it easier for application developers to apply their skills. And I want to talk about the evolution of data modeling for just a second as it relates to analytics, because it relates to that middle layer. So those of you that have been around for a while, there were two extremes. There have been two extremes for data modeling in healthcare. One is the monolithic enterprise data model over on the left-hand side. We know that that has all sorts of problems. At the other end is this notion that I think I was the first to coin it, called late binding data models, also now known as schema on read. And what the monolithic data model assumes is that we know all use cases for the data a priori, which is not the case. That's why they don't work. You don't know all, especially in healthcare, you don't know all the use cases a priori. So having this notion of a universal enterprise data model is a fallacy. You can't do it, and you can't keep up with the changes. Likewise, if you follow late binding too much, it assumes that you don't know any of the use cases a priori, and you have a proliferation of objects in your analytic environment that becomes unmanageable. That's not working either. The reality is there's this middle ground where we can say we know some of the use cases a priori, and there are these intermediate data models that we can create that are typically around a harmonized vocabulary or sometimes comprehensive and persistent agreement on data binding logic, for example, CMS value sets. Those are relatively non-volatile. They don't change that much. So that's an example of something that you could put in the middle of this data modeling continuum that's relatively stable. I would say from this point forward in data modeling history, ignore the left side because there is no such thing as a data model that understands everything a priori. So get rid of that. Think about how you create intermediate information in data models and then allow for late binding as the situation requires. And what you'll see in the future is a data pipeline with logic being called as a natural part of that data pipeline, either SQL logic, R, Python, etc., C#, and then expressing that out through analytic and decision modes of expression. You'll see fewer and fewer data models of any kind in that ground in between. Data models are a vestige of relational database management systems. That's the only thing we had to work with. But what you're going to see is the real-time binding of data with algorithms, not caching those, which, you know, a data model is essentially a cache, not caching those in data models, okay? So there are 7 attributes of a modern digital platform I would advocate. One is reusable business and clinical logic. Back to the logic in that pipe, as the data flows through, calling the logic in that piece of the pipe that resides above. A single data stream feeds analytics and workflow applications. So if you have the chance, study Kappa and Lambda architectures. Kappa and Lambda architectures that originated in Silicon Valley is the pattern for what I'm suggesting here. Single data stream feeds analytics and workflow. You don't have transaction systems and analytic systems anymore. They're combined, okay? It's a single platform. It integrates structured and unstructured data for analysis, text, images, and discrete, all in the same environment. It has closed loop capability, meaning it's not just a report out, but you're bending the analytics back to the workflow. Amazon is a classic example of this. You bend it back to the workflow, right? It's your transaction when you're buying something is surrounded by analytics about the thing you're buying. It's all one environment. That's closed loop. It has a microservices architecture, meaning continuous release cycles, continuous delivery of value. No more months-long upgrades. That is an archaic way to develop and deploy software. For heaven's sakes, we've got to stop doing that. How many times do you get updates to your Android, your iOS, Word, Outlook? It's continuous delivery of software. That's what we have to move healthcare towards. AI and machine learning are baked right into the pipeline. It's not a separate thing, including text analysis. And there's an agnostic data lake, meaning you can apply this over the top of any data lake. So that logic binding that I mentioned in the earlier slide can sit on top of any data stream. How am I doing on time, friend? 2 more minutes. Holy cow. Okay, so I'm just for the sake of reference, this is the architecture that HealthCatalyst has that we believe is a reflection of a modern digital platform. I'll just let you, the slides will be available. I just want you to look at it as a reference. I think this is more what we need to see in healthcare other than the architectures we see right now. Thoughts on AI and machine learning, et cetera, predictive models? I would advocate that predictions of risk without a plan or ability to intervene are a liability to the decision maker, not an asset. And we are awash in predictive risk algorithms right now. It's like everyone, including vendors, are in love with predictive risk algorithms. And I'm telling you, you have to go further than that. It's the intervention that matters. It's not the prediction of risk. It's the intervention that matters. And you create a liability to the decision maker if you don't give them an intervention. I use this to describe, when I'm communicating to executives, what is AI and pattern recognition. Your retina is the data collection system. So as I look out into the room today, right, I see people. My retina is collecting data about features. That's feature extraction and feature engineering. That's an AI term that you need to be familiar with. Then my cerebral cortex is going through classification and clustering of those features. So I'm starting to categorize all the people that I see in the room. And the more times you pass through this cycle, the better you get at feature extraction and recognition, classification, right? Discriminative neural networks mimic, which is traditionally what we talk about, they mimic the human pattern recognition process by basically saying, those are people. So if my brain were a pattern recognition algorithm in AI, I could identify that those are people and I could start classifying those as such. These generative adversarial networks that are emerging right now is the opposite of that. And that is the algorithm now is able to describe what a person is, okay? And it can actually output data to generate images that look like people. So it's the inverse. We do that. We can describe what a person looks like. But historically, we've not applied AI to that world, so it's very interesting what may be coming down. So that's all about pattern recognition. The fundamental patterns that I would advocate we all need to build out, patients like this, who were treated like this, had outcomes like this. And when you chain those three patterns together, and we can do this with AI, that's when we will reach predictability as a science in healthcare. Patients like this, who were treated like this, had outcomes like this. Simple conceptually, technology is there to do it. We just need more data to improve the precision. I want to mention this before we run out of time. We're stuck in if you go back to the previous slide for just a second, patients like this is the beginning of the journey. So if we don't precisely identify patients like this, everything downstream of it is also imprecise. Okay? So rules-based registries have flaws. Anybody that's worked in rules-based registries knows they have lots of false positives and false negatives. Interesting study that came out of Sweden recently, using k-means clustering, AI, and hierarchical clustering, they identified 5 distinct subtypes of adult onset diabetes that had never been identified before. We would have never been able to identify those without those AI techniques. This is going to change the taxonomy of disease. It's not, you don't just have type 2 diabetes anymore. You have some subtype of that. It's going to change the taxonomy of disease as we refine those patient identification and patient registries. Another study of similar type using topographical data analysis came out of Mount Sinai recently, and they identified 3 different subtypes of diabetic patients clustered around 73 variables. And we would have never found that if we were approaching it with the a priori assumption with rules that we knew what those groups were ahead of time. It's the data talking to us instead of us talking to the data. Finally, about this whole thing of data volume and AI sophistication, there's a great paper that came out of Google that tried to resolve this debate between AI sophistication of the algorithm versus data volume. And there was always this assumption that a sophisticated model could make up for less data. The reality is it's not. It's called the unreasonable effectiveness of data. And invariably, simple AI models with a lot of data are more effective than complex models. Okay? So you don't have to be incredibly complicated with AI algorithms. Another paper that described the hidden technical debt associated with AI. There's a lot of hype in the industry right now about what we can do with AI. But the reality is there's this huge technical debt associated with it, depicted in this diagram. The machine learning code, the AI code, is in that black box circled by yellow. The surrounding infrastructure is what's required to make those algorithms work and maintainable and sustainable. So it's a small fraction of the ecosystem. And what I would suggest is this is not the land of small niche startups or homegrown systems. There's a feeling right now that we can build our own because the public cloud has made it so appealing. But the hard part is not the infrastructure in the lower levels of that stack. The hard part is the collection, curation, and management of data and the logic associated with it. The development of APIs and applications on top of it. And I remind everybody, do you remember when we were all building our own PCs? Nobody does that anymore. That's the same kind of phenomenon that's happening with homegrown machine learning systems. And so I would suggest plug your sailor's ears, Odysseus. Don't listen to the sirens. It's very appealing. All right, there we go. In closing, master autonomy of purpose. There's a Freudian complex going on where we don't have as big a data as we'd like to think we have. A modern platform, we're at least 10 years behind. Push that. There's AI technical debt you need to be aware of. Don't be naive about it. There you go. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
So, Great presentation. Thank you very much, Dale. I think Dale will be hanging around for a little bit. If you wanted to approach him for a couple of minutes, we have a break coming up in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce Evan Sutherland from Orbita. He is our next Spotlight, Innovator Spotlight presentation. So, Evan.
Is this working? Yep. Wonderful. So, hi everyone. I'm Evan. I do. I'm with Orbita, and I'm going to talk to you about conversational experiences and how they can impact healthcare. So, it is actually really wonderful to follow a presentation like Dale's that's all about how we can collect data, how we can manage data, and how different forms of data can help impact your decisions. So, everyone's heard of conversational experiences because almost everybody has heard of Amazon Alexa, Google Voice, things like that. But when we're talking about conversational platforms, that also includes the text you get from your credit card company when you buy something out of country and it suspects fraud. It includes the little chatbots that pop up in the bottom right of every website. It's all part of the same universe that we call conversational experiences. I really actually liked the question before where everybody in the audience except for one person over there had a smartphone. So when we're thinking about smartphones, that is a part of the conversational experience universe, but smartphones came after mobile apps, and the adoption curve was X. The adoption from smartphones to conversational applications is even greater than it was when smartphones first came out. So when we're talking about this in healthcare, it could be especially impactful in the future. So moving forward, when you are talking about conversational platforms, you want to be able to be as flexible as possible when you're going to your customers. For me, I really like my Amazon Alexa in my house. I really like the smartphone that's in my pocket. But for example, my grandmother really doesn't like to use her smartphone because she can't figure out the password. We've told her her password a bunch of times, so you want to be able to go to your users, or in the case of this audience, your patients, with whatever modality that they're already familiar with. You want to be able to address the 30% of your patients that have an Alexa, the 20% that have Google Voice, the 50% that don't have a smart speaker at all and are using something different entirely. And to do that, what you would need is to build an application for each of those separate instances, and then figure out the integrations to your EHRs and EMRs, and figure out the integrations to your analytics engines that can do all sorts of cool detections. Or you could use something like Orbita. So with Orbita, and I think Orbita allows you to, I'm going to skip one, build a single application, launch it to all of those different modalities, whether it's Alexa, whether it's your chatbot, whether it's your smartphone, manage it from a single pane of glass, and have all the outcomes that are listed here. You can improve your engagement with your patients through another layer of communication. Medication adherence is one of our biggest use cases. Decreased errors from improved comprehension. So instead of getting a packet when you get a flu shot, you can have the same experience from an Amazon Alexa, and we've had statistically significant improvements in patient retention. And from an operations standpoint, simplifying workflows and creating operational efficiencies. So I think this is what it looks like. Similar to the way WordPress made it really easy to build and manage websites, we make it really easy to build your conversational flow. Once you have that underlying architecture, you can have your clinicians or your nurses or even your care team, me for my grandmother, go in and update the specifics, go from aspirin to ibuprofen or something like that. And when you do it with Orbita, you do not have to go in and re-architect your entire application structure. In practice, it looks like something like this. So Pillow Health is a partner of ours. If you haven't heard of them, I would highly recommend looking them up. Pillow is a customized smart speaker specifically for healthcare. Amazon, Google, a lot of the most popular smart speakers are not HIPAA compliant. This one is. It can sit in your doctor's office. It can sit next to your bedside table. And what's really cool is that you can unscrew the top and put medications in and dispense them at certain times once it does a facial recognition of the right person walking by it. So grandma can't figure out a smart speaker. Grandma can't figure out her iPhone. put this in her, in her living room. When it detects that she walks by it at certain times of the day, it will dispense medication, ask her to take it, and can also act as a telehealth beacon. That's my spiel. I'll be looming above you for the rest of the day if you have any questions, unless someone has questions right now. Wonderful.
Evan will be upstairs at the balcony, and he has a table up there. Please, if you have some questions, follow up with Evan after or during the break. We're going to take a quick break, but we have a slight change in our agenda for today. One of our speakers is unfortunately delayed, so we're actually going to put together a CIO panel of a number of CIOs that are here today. So hang in with us. We have some cookies in the back. Refresh your coffee. Take a break. We'll give you about 20 minutes. So we're going to do, it's about quarter of 3. So we'll say just after 3 o'clock, we'd like you to come on back, have a seat. We're going to put together a good panel for you, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Oh, and don't forget, visit our sponsors for raffles. Raffles will be coming up shortly. And also remember to give your bingo card to the membership table. Turn that in so that we could qualify you for a raffle. Please take your seats. Again, grab some coffee, some tea, another cookie. There we go. We have 2 very loud whistlers on the board, so we're very happy to have them both here on the same day. So as a reminder, please visit our Innovators Showcase organizations at the balcony. They would love to talk to you, love to show you more about their technology. Our sponsors are here. We would love for you to just turn in those bingo cards as well. You don't have to visit every single sponsor. We'd love for you to visit them, but please turn them in now at this point so we can figure out the raffle winners. So next up, I'd like to introduce Melissa Miu from Oracle. They are generously sponsoring the cocktail reception. So we'd like to have Melissa speak a little bit about Oracle and introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Matt. So if we could get everyone to sit down, that would be great. And for those of you outside, if you could come back in. So we had a little dilemma this morning. Our speaker that was going to speak on blockchain has been delayed, and he was caught in New York. I'm sure that's never happened to any of you where you get caught somewhere and you can't get to where you need to go. So we had to improvise, and so luckily we have some nice friends here, and I was walking in with Arthur Harvey, who is the CIO and Vice President at Boston Medical Center, and I said, I'm really worried. I don't know if the speaker's going to make it in. And he commented that he thought blockchain was a little bit of a hype anyway, so so maybe it is. Ba-bum-bum. So after that happened, I brought, he offered to speak on a panel, and then I called Sue Shade, and I said, Sue, I wanted to let you know where to park today, and I have a little favor to ask. Would you be willing to talk on a panel today? And she was gracious enough to say yes. So we have Sue Shade, who's a principal at Starbridge Advisors. And then I called Dr. Dirk Stanley, my friend, and I said, have you left Connecticut yet by any chance, Dirk? And he said, yes, I have. And I said, I have a little favor to ask. Could you be on a panel today for us? So they've been so gracious, all of them, and Dirk is the CMIO at UConn. And then, of course, we have the amazing, talented Mary Maloney, who is with Agilus Advisors, and she's also a recovering CIO, and she's also a past president of New England HIMSS. So she'll be moderating the panel. So please help me welcome the fabulous panel of all-stars. I feel like it's my dream team, except for maybe Arthur. Just kidding, Arthur.
I think I'm going to call them the blockchain group. Yeah. Okay. Got your water? So today's theme is innovation, obviously, and we decided that we'd put together this group of IT leaders so that we can discuss innovation in the healthcare organization. It's more of a real-life, boots-on-the-ground experience type thing. So let's start with our first question. So as CIO leaders, how do you define innovation and why do you care about it? Who wants to start?
I will start. Can we also do brief intros since
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
that's okay?
Obviously, I was so eager to get the panel started.
Okay, then we'll answer the question, right? So,
Yes.
brief intros since our bios are not in there. I'm Sue Shade. I am principal with a new firm called Starbridge Advisors. We do IT consulting, interim management, leadership coaching. I have over 30 plus years in health IT management. I'm told that when you're over 25 years, you shouldn't have to say, but you know, there's a lot of years. There's gray hair underneath here. I have served as CIO for Brigham and Women's, part of Partners. I'm sure there's a Partners contingent here, right? There usually is. Okay, great. I was there for almost 13 years. I left in late 12, went to University of Michigan as the CIO for their hospitals and health centers, and then in early 16, I decided I want to be back in New England by kids and grandkids and have more flexibility in my life, so I started down this path of consulting and interim management. Since then, I've done 2 interims, one at University Hospitals in Cleveland and one at Stony Brook Medicine on Long Island. So in the last 4 to 5 years, I've been in 4 different major organizations, so some interesting perspective on different organizations and cultures that I will share as we talk about innovation today. Good to be back in New England.
Okay, I'm Arthur Harvey. I'm the CIO and Vice President at Boston Medical Center. Much like Sue, I have been doing this since Magellan roamed the sea. It's all I know how to do, so it's a good thing that hospitals need computers. In addition to that, I have at various points been an educator and been a consultant, been on the vendor side, been on the provider side, just general purpose HIT wonk. So, and I'm also well known as the curmudgeon, so you'll obviously figure that out.
And I'm Dirk Stanley. I'm a physician. I'm a hospitalist by training, but I'm also the CMIO at UConn Health. I've been doing clinical informatics for about 12 years now, and I'm very excited to be here on this panel.
Glad to have you all. And I'm Mary Maloney, as Melissa said. I've been a CIO in a number of plans in the New York and Massachusetts area, and now a consultant, and also a lecturer at Northeastern University in their healthcare informatics program. Okay, I did it right. Now we
Great.
could start with the
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Okay. So, as tech leaders, I feel awkward not seeing you guys. As tech leaders in in healthcare, what's your definition of innovation, and why do you care about it? Why is it important?
Who wants to go first?
Sue.
Okay, Sue.
Okay.
Why innovate and why do we care about it? Healthcare is constantly changing, technology is constantly changing. I think that the speakers today have teed that up very well for us. Hal Wolf talked about some of the big challenges, talked about the silver tsunami, talked about consumer engagement, consumer demands. If we as healthcare organizations and leaders are not continuing to change, evolve, meet our client, customer, patient's needs, then we're just going to fall behind. We're going to lose market share. We're not going to be addressing the needs. So innovation broadly defined is new, change, progress, new ideas, and we owe it to our organizations and to the people that we serve to continually change in a positive way and innovate.
I agree with Sue in many respects. Innovation is about improving the outcomes for our patients and improving the efficiency of the organizations and how we deliver the care that we provide. Innovation to me isn't about gadgets, and I actually am an engineer, unlike a few people in this business. I love technology. I think it's fascinating. I love building junk. But the reality is, it isn't technology for technology's sake isn't innovation in the sense that I think of it. I mean, it's great if you're a product company, but if we're about improving the lives of the people who we serve, innovation's got to be driven towards that, and frankly, also driven towards generating efficiency. So, I mean, that's why I care about it, and to me, that's the fun part of the job. Is the fun part of the job is not efficiently producing invoices. I mean, we have to do that, and that's a part of the job, but maybe it's fun for some of you, not fun for me. The fun part of the job is figuring out how do we get the care to the people who most need it. How to, like, Dale was talking about it in his excellent talk, but how do you figure out the stories about the patients and get the right patients the right care, the right time? That to me is what's exciting.
And as a CMIO, I love innovation. It is so vitally important for multiple reasons. There are technology reasons why it's important. It's also, it's about doing something different. It's about not just going and doing your daily job and how do you get things done. It's how do you do it better? How do you do it faster? How do you do it safer and more effectively? And so there's the part of innovation that I think is so important because we need to, there's a lot of things that we need to do to help healthcare get better in the next 20 years. I'm sorry, is my mic still on? Sorry. So there's a lot of things that we need, especially as our population gets older. We have a lot of patients that we're going to have to care for in the next 10 to 20 years, and we don't have quite as many care providers as we need. So we're kind of depending on this innovation to help us deliver care, not just inside the hospital or inside the clinic, but at home, and find new ways to prevent diseases. And so to me, it's not only interesting, it kind of makes the job interesting and fun, but there's actually a mission critical part of this to help care for our population that we have here in our country and in other countries too.
So what would you say are the key attributes of a successful, innovative organization? What are the key factors that are there?
You gonna let me start?
You don't have to. You want me to go first so you can go in rebuttal?
That's okay.
Sue
I'll
had
start.
really good thought.
He
Yeah,
already
go
pointed
ahead.
to me. I had good thoughts at
Yes,
lunch, right?
I love that.
So you have to know that we were asked to do this today, and we prepped at lunch. We decided on the topic, and we had this really lively conversation. I think culture is critical. And by culture, I mean it's an organization that is constantly looking ahead at how to improve. And it's a culture where everybody is expected to do that. I'd use the example when I was at University of Michigan Health System, and we were a big lean organization, and Dr. Jack Billy, who was responsible for driving our efforts around lean, would say, we want 25,000 problem solvers, 25,000 employees, 25,000 problem solvers. I'd say the same thing about innovation. We want, in that case, 25,000 innovators. So it's everybody's job. It's not just the chief innovation officer, if there is one, and I'm sure we'll get into that. So there's got to be a culture where everybody is thinking, how do we improve, how do we change, all in the service, ultimately, of our patients.
I would add to it, it's where there is no pride of ownership of the ideas for change, where you don't care where the idea came from. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. Go with it. Innovation when I look at what I find to be innovative organizations, particularly in healthcare, they're the ones who, healthcare is a do-it profession. I mean, we're out there doing stuff, right? Whether you're doing it in the data center or in the OR, we have a lot of different processes. It's wacky complicated, right? So I'm not going to know what improvement, or innovation looks like in materials handling. Well, let's hope not. But I should be talking to the people there, and that's where this makes you have these dyads where you've got maybe some tech people, some process people working with the actual operators to say, hey, we think we can do it better, faster, more innovative this way. Or they come to you and say, we got this wacky idea. Can you guys, could you put a screen up with timings on how long it took us to unload the truck to encourage more productivity? Okay, that's a good innovative idea, right? Did that help us? Sure it did. So when I look at innovative organizations, to Sue's point, it's a team sport, get everybody involved, but it's also about individuals or groups can't make it. The real innovations tend to come from cross-functional parts of the organization where you get two different disciplines involved, and they come up with something that's greater than the sum of the parts.
And for me, I think innovation also it's key that you want innovation. You want to, and you have to plan innovation. You have to, like, and you have to think about it. Like, who's gonna be responsible for innovation? Is it one person? Is it everyone? Is it teams of people? Like, and the other thing I'll say is that I think everybody inherently, as human beings, we want to innovate. We want to. I mean, probably our earliest human ancestors were like, "Hey, look, a wheel. We can, maybe we can do something with this." But the people want to see if there's an easier way to do things or a faster way to do things. So inspiring creativity, and that gets to your part about culture, like that Sue brought up. It's so important that your culture supports innovation and supports creative thinking and open discussion. Just being able to have a safe place to say, like, hey, this is what we do every day, but maybe there's another way to do it better, is such an important conversation. And so you have to foster those conversations and plan on having safe ways to have those conversations. So it's really about, to your point, embedding it into the culture and making sure that it's part of what you do, part of your hiring process, part of your training, part of your, everything about how you interact with your staff really needs to be geared towards some sort of an innovation strategy, whether it's a focused, a team or whether it's a distributed model. But you want to cultivate that, because if you don't innovate, and I think earlier one of the things that we brought up during lunch, if you don't innovate, you can get left behind. And nobody wants to be left behind, and all of us want to succeed, and all of us want to feel good about what we're doing. So it's so important that you at least have those conversations about how are we going to innovate.
Oh, go ahead.
I would add, within healthcare, we're used to a no-blame culture when it comes to being able to lift up a patient incident, what happened, why did it happen, do the RCA, what did we learn from it? So you have to have that kind of thinking within healthcare. I think what goes along with that when you talk about innovation is you can't have fear of failure. I mean, people have to be willing to experiment, certainly not experiment in ways that could hurt patients, but broadly that you can try new things, you can put new things out there and not be afraid of failing.
Yeah, and I just extend that to say it's not just about fear of failure. People generally tend to have a fear of change, okay? And innovation is change. It's one of those things you've got to look about, and that means there's sort of, when we're talking about things, my team knows that what will drive me absolutely insane is the phrase, because that's how we've always done it. Drives me bonkers, okay? Because if we just want to do it that way, well, let's go get the old folks, okay? And because I'm an old folk. But that's one of those things that you've got to be willing to do that. And you don't have to do it about everything every single time, but you really have to be open to at least examining everything.
So one of the things that I heard is that innovation isn't necessarily about a particular technology. It could be an innovative thought of how to do something. So, Dirk, what are your thoughts on that?
For me, personally, a lot of innovation happens when you hear conversations, and if anyone has the privilege of hearing doctors and nurses talking about patients, and often they'll, even just in their common interchanges, they'll discuss like, boy, if we only had a blah blah blah, or if somebody downstairs in the emergency department knew that blah blah blah, or if the family member just had an easy way to do whatever. You can mine those conversations, and they're very often the solutions are not hard. They don't require major investments. Some of them are like small little performance improvement projects, but those are a valuable source of like just how do we deliver care and how can we make it better. So I don't think it always has to represent a technology investment. However, that being said, you also want to, this is part of the planning of innovation, you want to talk about it because
you utilize technology.
And how are we going to, and if we do need to utilize technology, what is the investment that we're going to need to make for it? So it should be a common conversation. How are we managing innovation?
So if I can add, one of the things, I write a weekly blog called Health IT Connect that you can find at sushade.com. That's a small plug. And last week it was Nurses Week, and I wrote a blog about nurses, but the title of it was Celebrate Nurses, but more importantly, listen to them. I have a daughter, I have two daughters. One of them is a nurse practitioner. She's the lead NP on a very busy inpatient ortho unit. And she, like probably most nurses and nurse practitioners and physicians, get frustrated when they see things on the front lines of patient care that they want to change, they want different, they want to improve, and they can't get people to pay attention or to listen to it. So it's the people who are on the front lines doing the work in our organizations that see the changes that are needed, that might be possible, and we need to go there, we need to listen, and we need to help figure out what those changes and innovations could be. So it's really listening to the people who are delivering the services and the care.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because the people with expertise in doing anything, I mean, IT folks tend to be expert in, IT. So, well, we hope. That's part of us talking to our customers, listening to our customers, understanding, and they're our colleagues too, and understanding it. I will put a little spin on it though. You can rapidly, and I've been there, okay, you can rapidly swirl into 82 million little projects which take as much time as putting in Epic, okay? So you kind of have to make sure that part of the role of IT is to take and listen and rationalize what's being asked for, and then put it into some kind of a governance process so that you're rationally thinking about what's the most important thing to do. And I'm going to say, and I've said this at all kinds of other presentations, I firmly believe that if IT is deciding what projects IT is working on, you have lost. You've lost. So other people make the decisions about what's important. We figure out how to do it efficiently. But the point is, make sure that all of the things get rationally considered. And there's different processes. If it's a dinky little thing, it's not a big, heavy process. If it's something that takes a long time, it's a bigger process. But do that and get the best ideas, be the ones that get worked on first. And don't discard the next to best ideas. Those you get to the next round, right? But that's critically important to actually get stuff out the door, because if you just talk to people about it, then you run around like, nut jobs trying to figure out what the next right thing to do is, and having some rationality in there. I have found that our customers appreciate that too. The nurse appreciates she wants it done today, sure, but she's pretty happy if you say, we can't do that today, but we're going to get to it next quarter. That's way better than, oh yeah, it's on the list. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
So you're almost saying that there should be some kind of governance
No,
program?
I'm not almost saying this. There should be some kind of governance. If you don't have governance, you're in trouble.
And if there's one area that really is ripe for innovation, I think governance is clinical governance, like make that interface between the clinical side and IT, making that meaningful and making that organized and well-developed and well thought out, where people understand what's going on and there's clarity and transparency. That's so important.
We actually, in our lunch conversation prep, talked about governance relative to all the IT work going on, and governance, if you will, around innovation. And there's probably people who would say, oh, you can't govern innovation, you're already squelching it. But if what you don't want is the go-arounds and the back doors, and this kind of gets into, maybe we talk about it a bit, who owns innovation, and what structures are there in organizations. But you can't have IT working on this list of priorities, and then people over here just doing, well, let's try this, that, and the other thing, and then they're competing with those IT resources, or they're finding other ways to get it done, and kind of working around it. That's like a whole can of worms to open up, but we can get into that more.
Yeah, so what are the models that you think do work for bringing innovation into an organization?
Well, models, there's a few different ones out there. I tend to think of it now, of course, the CEO of a safety net hospital, so I tend to think about it, how do you do it for $3? So we have a tendency to be asked to partner with vendors from time to time about certain projects, and I have to say no to most of them, even though the vendors want to do that work. It's stuff I need to do. I have resourcing issues. I can't devote my team to help them build their product a lot of the time. What we can do, however, is we can look for the smaller sort of, think of it as a continuous improvement kind of model for us, that we can work with various people around the hospital for quality improvement or process improvement projects that are innovative, and we can carefully pick our spots to look at sort of pure technology innovation maybe once or twice a year. That's about all we can do. The balance, and I'm sure others will talk about this, the balance we struggle with is, do you have an internal innovation unit, or do you just make it part of all the other work? And I'm a firm believer in you make it part of all the other work, and there's lots of reasons for that. Mostly it's around staff satisfaction. I mean, that's a critical issue to me. I've been at places where, oh, well, we're going to have this special team that's going to do all the fun work, which means what the staff hears in their heads, even though nobody says it, is, you guys aren't clever enough to do the fun work. You go back there and produce the invoices. And that's not generally good for employee engagement, let's put it that way, except perhaps engagement with the recruiters. So we like to sort of spread around. I joked at I joked at lunch, and I'm sure Miriam, who used to be on our team, will agree with this. I believe my role is to spread unhappiness evenly throughout the organization so that everybody gets some fun stuff and everybody gets some non-fun stuff, and that generally has worked well for me.
So at least from innovation strategy, I think it depends on the organization, and I know you're going to speak more about this, but the culture will sort of tell you like what an acceptable innovation strategy is. But I think the most important part is just talking about it. Like, and I don't just, if I had to ask for a show of hands, how many people think they had a conversation to plan innovation in the last 6 months? Anyone? See, like, that's such an important part of like what we do, like making sure that our businesses don't stagnate and making sure that what we're doing, that we feel good about it, is important to spread this innovation. And I'll tell you at least one little success story I had is I had a very small informatics team that was interested in innovation, and we just started having lunchtime. We called it the TED lunches, even though technically I don't think you're allowed to call it a TED lunch, but we at least kind of presented to each other on like what are some areas that we saw for innovation. And we even tweeted it. You can go back in the Twitter feed and you'll see like little pictures from our talks. But giving people an opportunity to feel value in innovation is so important. So that's where, whether you concentrate it all on one team or you distribute it, but it's still an important part of all of our business plans.
So what Arthur said about it not being separate, I would agree with. I think that you do run the risk when you have a separate group internally focused on innovation of having everybody else go, well, I don't have to come up with anything new, or they don't think I can come up with anything new, or I'm the IT person who has to keep the trains running, but really I went into IT and I'm passionate about healthcare and IT and I want to do new, innovative things. So you can create that kind of dynamic that I think is not really healthy. If in fact the organization does have a separate group focused on innovation, then I think it is totally on the CIO to and their leadership team to make sure that they are well connected and are partnering with them, that there's not a them versus us. We'll see how they do. Maybe they'll fail because they're going to need us, but they're not asking us. You have to partner for the greater good of the organization. And ultimately, in order to integrate with core systems, which often from a technology innovation perspective is needed, or to scale up, go beyond that first pilot internally, you need IT. So kind of, if you're that leader and you're in that situation, I say suck it up and work with the people who've been, they've had the rose pinned on them by the upper leaders that they're in charge of innovation. The last thing I would say is there's different organizations now that I think you see some of the bigger ones, some of the academics, some of the ones in markets where there's a lot of vendor technology startups who are doing innovation centers. I know Partners has one. I know that BI has one. Cedars-Sinai out west has something. And they seem focused on doing commercial ventures and partnering with companies and getting venture funding, et cetera. So that's another model. I've also seen a model where organizations come together, kind of a consortium. I think AVIA, A-V-I-A, if you're familiar with that, and then the Innovation Institute, which I've just recently learned more about. They're like consortiums with healthcare organizations that are members that invest money, and then they are benefiting from, you know, the solutions that come from that, which hopefully are solving problems they have, but also from the commercialization of those solutions. So yeah, it seems like every week I'm reading about another organization that's launching their innovation thing, and I think a lot of them are commercially focused, which is a good thing.
So I think you all mentioned that there are certain challenges, and I think, could we talk about what those challenges are, the top challenges that you see in bringing in innovation into an organization?
So for me, as a CMIO, I deal with a lot of clinical people, and absolutely the biggest challenge is just finding time for these conversations, because, you know, clinical people are busy taking care of patients usually, and so any time you can carve out means that you're either, you know, taking over their lunch, or you're getting them in earlier, or ask them to stay later. So it's very hard to carve out time for this. But I think it's still an important thing to do. So I think that's an issue. And then sometimes when you come up with ideas, then budgeting for those ideas, making, you know, and some ideas are small, some ideas are medium-sized, and some are large. And especially when you come into those large kind of things, this is where having a good CIO at your side is so important to make sure that, you know, that you're planning appropriately and you're budgeting appropriately and scoping and implementing it all appropriately. So it requires time and effort, but you have to care about it to overcome those obstacles.
I think the resourcing and how do you twist it into your daily work, right? You've got a lot going on, carving out time for innovation. There's techniques we talked about that, you know, you can get you some of that. You can maybe get some funding but the funding tends to be for the challenge in my way of thinking about a lot of this stuff is people get excited about the latest widget because widgets are cool, right? And the vendors do a good job, and no disrespect to our vendor partners, because I wouldn't be able to run my shop without you. But oftentimes we have the latest widget or the latest algorithm or the latest, we promise this will solve all of your population health dilemmas, which is presented to you on this lovely floppy disk. You can tell I'm old, I remember those. Hell, I remember punch paper tape. I'm really old. But the reality of it is the widgets tend to be that short-lived, you know, it's kind of like the Fisher-Price toy. It's useful for a little while, and then it gets stuck in the garage. It's interesting. But then the innovative folks say, oh, hey, IT, go scale that up and make it work for the whole organization, when the thing was conveniently written in Microsoft Access and may not quite be ready for prime time. And I'm painting that goofy picture because that's the sort of stuff you got to be cautious about. That if you have a good partnership, whether innovation's taking place in my organization or the global organization or some special innovation shop, you got to partner up and say, what's the end game? And the end game has to take into account security, scalability, performance, overall cost, maintenance. How are you going to do that? That's all the non-sexy part of IT that we all know and loathe so much, but it's what we do. And you've got to be cautious that people get excited about the latest and greatest, and they don't think about the end game. And I've seen that. Hell, I've done that. So that, if I'm going to point out one thing I really think is a challenge, that's probably the biggest one.
Very well said. I was going to describe it as one-off, and I think you did that really well in terms of it can't be a one-off. It's got to come back in and be integrated and secure and on the network and scaled, et cetera. I think another challenge, and we've talked a lot about challenges, I think, by what we've covered already, but I think another one is staying grounded. And one of the organizations I was in where there was a chief innovation officer, and the CFO would say, okay, he's like way out there, way up here with all these ideas that aren't at all the problems that we need to solve. And there's some happy medium between, I think, the big visionary thinkers who are thinking about, new stuff we need to be doing, and on the ground problems. So how do you close that gap? Is one of the challenges, I think, within an organization. It takes leadership.
Okay. You don't have anything to add?
No,
Just
but
that-
just
that
making sure
clinical.
it's an important part of planning. You have to plan
Yeah.
for innovation, right?
Yeah. So,
Oh, you're
Mine?
right.
okay. So how do you ensure that you have success with innovations? You're asked to do all these things. We talked about the challenges. What's a good way to ensure success?
I have it. So every innovation that I plan, on day one, what are the measures of success? And we design for those measures of success. So if you don't design for success, then you will not achieve success. It's like, I think their engineers will often say, systems function exactly as designed. Has anyone heard that phrase? So you have to design for success. And so the only way that you can do that is if you know part of the idea of what you're conceiving has to include what is the measure of success.
I would totally agree with that. We've talked about scale. I think that along with what are the measures of success, and if you're trying something out, small scale pilot, then you also have to be able to apply those measures, evaluate, say, this worked, this didn't work, we got to tweak it, or we should stop it. If it works and it's going to be tweaked and you're ready to scale, make that a really conscious decision. I was saying at lunch that one of my pet peeves in one of the organizations I was in was finding out about various things that particular groups had done and tried and implemented on just one nursing unit in a very big organization. And a few people were using it and liked it. It's like, okay, if this is really that great and they really like it and it's making a difference, why are we not taking steps to figure out how to scale this and fully integrate it? Why is it just this little pocket of, a great new idea, but we haven't, operationalized it fully or scaled it for the organization as we should? So that gets into measuring and then making those conscious decisions.
Okay, I told you I was the curmudgeon. The question is, how do you ensure success? You don't. Sometimes you're going to fail, and that's okay. Okay, and this message brought to you by somebody who fails a lot. The trick about innovation is, if you already know how to do it, it probably would have already been done. There's a certain amount of the unknown there, and I don't mean to, I'm being glib here because everything that has been said about this has been true, but the missing bit is fail fast, think about it, figure out why you failed, and then ask yourself, okay, do we fix it and try again? Or is that really a fatal failure? And the willingness to fail, just like the willingness to accept somebody's idea is better than yours, is a key component to being a successful innovator. We all know stories about how many times Thomas Edison mucked it up before he got a light bulb, right? So this stuff happens, and that's going to happen to you. But the trick is, how do you deal with it? And it can be really challenging, particularly if you've got an organization where people are used to succeeding and they pride themselves on succeeding, and you want to be an innovator. Part of that is sometimes just no matter how much effort you put in or how smart you are, it turns out to be a bad idea because you didn't know something or something else happened or whatever. So I guess I can't guarantee, I can tell you some steps we've already talked about, and the concept of if you do muck it up, ask yourself, okay, what do I do to fix it? So then you'll eventually get to where you succeed.
Can I add something about the success and challenges? So probably everybody in here is working with an EHR. Most likely you are working with a major vendor EHR as opposed to self-development, which some of us have been through, right? I think it's really critical, and this is my philosophy around core products and add-on. Let's take Epic or Cerner or Meditech may not be the greatest example because they do seem to do everything, but take Epic or Cerner. And let's say you've got a group of clinicians who think Epic can't do that, Cerner can't do that, but we need that, and we're going to figure it out and do it, right? You may need to focus on educating them about what Epic or Cerner can, in fact, do, or what is coming in the next year. You're laughing. You're going to say something about this. What's coming in the next year on their roadmap, right? And if there's going to be something there that you can work with, then work with that. If there's not, then look at a niche solution, preferably probably a niche vendor that's already done it, proven in the market or new to the market that you can integrate. And if it's not on the core roadmap for your vendor and it's not available in a niche, and you are in fact the smartest people around and have figured out this new thing that no one else has, then go ahead and develop it. Bottom line on all this is you can get into a situation with people focusing on innovations who don't recognize what you already have to work with and leverage. And I think as IT leaders, it's really important to have those conversations, help people understand and fully leverage what you already have.
Okay, and I can't resist. We call those HBSs, harebrained schemes, and the oh, absolutely. I'm sure. And look, I've had a bunch, and I completely agree with Sue's point here. If your EHR vendor of choice doesn't do it and isn't planning on doing it, the first thing I tell this to my clinicians all the time when they want a custom this or a specialized that, or we got to get this from my brother-in-law's second cousin. I tell them, okay, but explain to me why Boston Medical Center, the safety net hospital here in the hub of the universe, is different than every other Epic hospital on planet Earth. I mean, do we have, now in some areas we are different, and that's okay, okay. Now if it's something where we really are different, but if it's orthopedic surgery wants something, I mean, we put knees in the same way that Partners does, that everybody else does. Why on earth do we need an add-on for orthopedic surgery? And I expect an explanation as to why that's an innovation and not just silliness, okay? So, and that's okay. But that's okay. You can go back to what I said at the beginning. Have a rational discussion with your colleagues, build up enough credibility that they will take you seriously too. And you can't just be Mr. or Mrs. No all day long. They'll take you seriously when you ask, why are we different than everybody else? With that sort of, puppy dog look.
Yeah, and I would say you don't want to have innovation for innovation's sake. That's definitely, I think, a death knell. Okay, so we are down to 10 minutes, and we wanted to give you all an opportunity to question this group. So I will volunteer my mic.
Your chance to play Stump the CIO.
Good afternoon. Get the distance right. My name is Mike Maselli. I'm from EDI. My question is, what came first, the requirements or the solution? So the clinical leadership or the administrative leadership says we want to improve X. They go to IT, we want to improve X. Well, what would you like it to do? What can you make it do? We can make it do anything you want. You just need to tell us. So in your experience, how do you get to that point? Is it the role of the healthcare business analyst to kind of talk both languages and get to that medium point? And what do you do if your organization doesn't have somebody like that?
Okay. The answer to that is it depends. If you're a dinky little organization and you're going to do something semi-trivial and you're going to do it on an iterative basis, you can design it and then see if they like it and go back. Certainly done that. If it's something substantive, I would argue that if you don't have somebody who can be and we all call them by different names, whether it's a business analyst, it's a requirements generator, it's a project manager, it's a software engineer who speaks English, whatever it is, if you can't generate a plausible set of requirements, not to the level of that you'd use if you were a software company, because, hey, I've been in software companies, something that's rational that is agreed to. If you can't generate that, you can't do the project. Because if I'm held accountable for paying for the project, I can't tell you how much it costs unless I know what I'm building.
I think two key questions that IT people need to ask, and I've, as CIO, asked this a lot. Who asked you to do that? Because sometimes you find out that IT people are off and running, right? Who asked you to do that? Do you have a sponsor, a decision maker who thinks that's important? Secondly, what problem are you trying to solve? Do we know? Which gets at the requirements.
I think this is a really good question, actually, because I think every organization struggles with this. The part that I think is important to consider is the workflow, and that's a concept that I find very interesting because everyone uses the word workflow slightly differently, like every organization uses it slightly differently, but I'll give a shout out to Charles Webster, who's a doctor on Twitter who's written a lot about workflow and workflow engineering. And workflow is really the process that we use to get something done. It uses people and time to accomplish a desired outcome. And so what recipe we use to do our business is so vital to answering the questions like you're talking about. The big question is, well, who really knows the workflow? Is it the nurses? Is it the doctors? Is it the finance people? And one of the things I find as a clinical informaticist is that there's areas where they have common understanding about the workflow, and then there's areas where they differ about the workflow. So to answer your question, I think it's important to engage all of those people in the conversation about what is the problem we're trying to solve, how are we going to solve it, and I find it very effective to actually map out, like step 1, step 2, step 3, which step are we trying to intervene on and what is the benefit of that? Because before you even get into the build, before you get into the project management, like you need to really define what are you trying to do and what is the benefit of that going to be. So, and you can do this in a room with a whiteboard and, like an hour roughly, for most workflows, but it means starting with that before you even do your project intake and your scoping and your analysis. And so, mapping out the current state workflow and planning your future workflow and then figuring out how to get from point A to point B is a vital step in that. That being said, many organizations disagree over whose responsibility that is. Often the IT people will say, well, the doctors know the workflow, and the doctors will say, I don't really know the workflow. The nurses know the workflow. So I think the answer is, to get more to where you're going, like the first step is like really understanding who's responsible for the workflow. And I think from a clinical informatics perspective, this is an area where a lot of clinical informaticists are trying to help own the workflows and make sure that there's clarity before you undertake these projects, that if you don't know what you're trying to solve, you can waste a lot of time and resources. So.
Hi, my name is Mary Kennedy, and I'm an adjunct over at Northeastern. But I have a question. We talked about so many interesting things today about the future and so much of the innovation that's coming. But my question is, in your experiences, how can we address some of the usability, especially the documentation requirements of the frontline provider, and diminishing those? I mean, nurses, physicians, other clinicians spend like 30 to 50% of their time tethered to a machine. And I think, we've spent the last 20 years building the EHR, and I wondered if in your experience you've seen places that are really trying to tackle this and making a real difference in this area. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So let me say that's a very important area, and we just heard about physician burnout, and it's not just physician burnout; it's nursing burnout. Like if it takes a nurse an hour to intake a patient, like that's not acceptable. So so the answer to your question is sort of multifactorial, and you know, this is just my take on it. It's a multifactorial sort of thing. The first thing is you need to plan strategically for your entire workflow, and this gets back to the whole discussion about workflow, but the documentation on intake of whether it's an office visit or a hospital admission or even a visit, you know, visiting nurse encounter or whatever the encounter is, you really need to like plan that whole process. And there's actual tools for how to do this that if you want, come up afterwards. I'm more than happy to share more information. But you need to plan that out, and then you don't want anybody double documenting. So I've seen a lot of places where the nurses are documenting the exact same data elements that the physicians are documenting, and that's not helping anyone. Like why, unless you're doing it for like data validity reasons, like, you know, like, are you smoking? No. Are you sure you're not smoking? Like, well, okay, I am smoking. Like, unless you have a really good reason to double document, you should never double document. Then there's also a lot of misunderstanding about like regulations, and like sometimes there's certain areas where people are like, well, we were told we had to document it for, you know, this type of encounter, where that may not have been. Now, in some cases, it is part of the regulations, but you always have to make sure that every single data element you're collecting has value and is doing something to help you. Then there's other things that you want to consider, just the clinical need. Like what, you know, for this type of encounter, what are the key data elements that we need to make an accurate diagnosis and to plan our you know, treatment effectively? And so it requires a lot of work to plan it out that way. I think a lot of organizations struggle with that usability because they haven't really sat down and talked about it, and they haven't strategically designed those data elements. And sometimes those data elements are also like the person who's collecting them is because it's even the order of like, you know, is it something that the registration person should have been asking and they didn't ask, so now the nurse is asking it. So you really, like, it takes a lot of work to improve the usability, but it's such an important part. So I would love to talk more afterwards, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Good?
Yes.
No, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I just want to make a pitch for those of you at that table and maybe some other tables who do nursing informatics. My sense is that some organizations continue to realize the value of CNIOs and nursing informatics along with CMIOs, clinical informatics, and others are not on the nursing side. They're going, we've got the HR in, what do we need them for? And I think your role is so important. I hope that you are valued in your organizations, because IT cannot alone solve the usability issues. IT needs to be working with the informatics, medical and nursing informatics folks, and the frontline nurses who are using the system. So I hope you are valued. I value you.
Okay, just quickly on this, there's all kinds of different dimensions. I agree, it's a multidimensional problem. Yep, there are wacky documentation rules that I suspect if we aggregated everybody in the room, we could probably name them all. But they make no sense, and they're mostly driven by billing, and we all know that, and that's okay, the rules are the rules. I think that some reform there would be helpful. I'm not holding my breath on that. I do think that there's technological help to be had in the future. I've seen some prototypes for completely AI-enabled, voice-driven documentation. I don't think it's that far away. Anybody who's got Siri on their phone knows that it's getting better. Not 100% certain yet. I mean, there's virtual scribe technology. There's a lot of stuff cooking around. I see that happening. The main complaint I get from my clinicians is not so much that they have to document, which they loathe, but that they have to stare at the damn keyboard and the screen while they're doing it, and they can't talk to the patient. And I get that. Look, we all know this because we're all patients too, okay? And when my primary care doc does that, it drives me nuts, because all he wants to do is tell me how bad Epic is and ask me how to fix it. So, you know, forget my blood pressure, we're gonna talk about Epic. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that's coming, but I will absolutely agree. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement. Right now, the situation is damn near untenable, and we have to fix it.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to thank this wonderful group coming together impromptu and supporting us this afternoon. And thank you all for your participation today.
Innovator Spotlight presentation. We have Paul from Neuroelectrics. He's going to give us a presentation on his company and what they do.
The green is the clicker. Okay, very good. Thank you. So, good afternoon. If you go through these statistics between the United Nations, the World Health Organization, if you take together people that have a neurological or neurodegenerative disease, a psychiatric disorder, or addiction, it turns out that 1.4 billion people will be affected by a brain disorder at some point in their lives. That's 1 out of every 5 people on the planet. So I know that everybody in this room has either themselves have a loved one or a close friend who has suffered or is suffering from a brain disorder. These are many ways, these are awful diseases, and that it's not just the body that's affected, it's sort of the personality, the brain, the essence of what it is that makes us human. And in many cases, there are no cures. Yes, we have some therapeutics and some therapies that work extremely well, sometimes for limited populations, but by and large, we don't have cures for these conditions. And in large part, just because the brain is a very complicated organ, 10 billion neurons, we're really just at the beginning from a neuroscience standpoint of really understanding how the brain works. So with that, let me talk about Neuroelectrics. We are a hybrid of a therapeutic device company and a data company that's looking to come with better ways to diagnose and treat disorders of the brain. From a technical thrust, we really have 2 parts of this. One is that we take EEG data, electroencephalography. This is what neurologists use to diagnose certain neurological disorders. But we've built up a fairly sophisticated machine learning platform with algorithms that allow us to take the EEG data and look for sort of patterns in there that aren't otherwise identifiable to the neurologist. What we're also doing is with the same hardware that we're using to diagnose these disorders is inject small levels of electricity, currents, into the brain in an attempt to sort of modulate certain networks. So that may sound like science fiction, it's actually not. Companies like Medtronic, Boston Scientific sell about $6 billion worth of implantable devices like this that surgically are put in to stimulate parts of the brain or the spinal cord. What we're doing is doing it non-invasively. So we can just put this cap onto somebody for, say, 20 to 30 minutes and try and directly modulate the networks or the regions of the brain that are causing or affected by these disorders. And we're trying to build our hardware and software in a way that is something which can be used not just in the hospital, but eventually at a price point and a convenience factor that can be sent home with the patients. So this is a video. It worked in the demo. If I click that. That. Person in the back. Can we click? Yes, thank you. Okay. This is an example that we use with some of our work in epilepsy, where we use EEG data. We then take and map it onto the brain physically, and then sort of run it through our algorithms to try and diagnose, help the physicians decide where in this case, the seizure focus or foci are. Based on that, they would come up with a personalized stimulation algorithm and montage for these patients. Or in the case of epilepsy, what we're doing is actually stimulating this area where the seizure actually starts with the idea of inhibiting it, so when it actually starts, it doesn't actually go and become a full-blown seizure. So this may sound science fiction to some of you, but we're actually using it and deploying it with patients now. So in terms of our clinical programs, there's 3 I want to talk about. The one that's farthest along is in the area of epilepsy, epilepsy that's not well controlled by medication. 50 million people worldwide suffer from epilepsy. 1 out of 3 of those patients, their seizures are not controlled by medication. Today, their options are surgery, brain surgery to get part of the brain scooped out, brain surgery to get part of the brain snipped, brain surgery to have a $100,000 implant put in. Brain surgery is the common theme in all of those. What we're doing is a non-invasive intervention. We basically put the hardware on 20 minutes a day, 10 days, and we're looking to reduce the seizures in these patients by at least 50%. Now, if you don't have a family member or someone that's affected by epilepsy, is 50% meaningful? 50% is very meaningful. 50% is the difference between a parent not having to sleep in the same bed as their child. 50% is the difference between somebody being able to go back to work. We're currently in the open label part of the study at Boston Children's Hospital and Beth Israel Deaconess. We're getting great results out of the open label. We expect to start the pivotal later this year, and if all goes well, this therapy will be on the market in the year 2020. Second area we're working in is Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's is a degenerative disease. Part of the brain called the substantia nigra essentially sort of collapses and dies. Today, the diagnoses are made symptomatically by neurologists. By the time a patient with Parkinson's gets diagnosed with Parkinson's, typically 80 to 90% of the affected area of the brain is already gone. There's a number of very promising therapeutics in development that either slow or reverse or sort of mitigate the neurodegeneration. But if you start to apply that therapy when you've already lost 90% of the brain, you've got a losing battle. The key of making these new therapeutics work is being able to diagnose the Parkinson's much earlier than we do today. So thanks to some funding from the Michael J. Fox Foundation, we've actually, fortunately, got our hands on a retrospective data set, and we found that with 85 to 90% accuracy, we could predict which patients were going to go on to develop Parkinson's disease 5 to 10 years out. We're currently in a 750 patient prospective study collecting data over 3 years. If this is successful, we actually have a way of being able to diagnose Parkinson's disease pre-symptomatically when these new therapeutics can actually make a difference in the lives of these patients. Now, probably the area I find the most fascinating that working in is in the area of diseases of the aging brain, things like dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's. This has been historically just a very, very tough area to develop new therapeutics in. The last new therapeutic in Alzheimer's disease was approved in the United States in 1994. Yeah, nearly 25 years ago. Aricept actually does nothing to actually cure the disease. All it does is mitigate the symptoms as the disease progresses. So what we've been working on is using this electrical stimulation of the affective networks of the brain to see if we can sort of reverse, mitigate, or improve the plasticity of regions of the brain that are affected by the aging of the brain. One of the interesting things we're doing is a study at a Harvard-affiliated nursing home. We're actually stimulating the motor cortex of patients with early signs of dementia. It turns out there's a very strong correlation between dementia, cognitive symptoms, and measures of gait and balance. So these patients are more likely to fall and injure themselves. And you know the cost of when an elderly person falls, that's $34 billion. But you break the hip, it's just an awful thing to do. We're actually seeing meaningful improvements in the gait and balance of these patients. We're also doing some more speculative work in the idea of actually trying to reverse or prevent the formation of Alzheimer's disease and the cognitive functions in this. It's a bit early, but we are in human clinical trials right now. So, you guys are in information systems, so I just want to talk about a bit of the overlap, I think with some of the work that we're doing. First is in the area of the distributed delivery of therapy. Right now, the systems that we're doing the treatments in controlled academic settings. We think that's great for getting the therapies approved. But ultimately, if you look at these being palliative therapies that have to be delivered over time, we can't bring in every patient that needs this once a week for a treatment. This has to be put into nursing homes. This needs to be put into minute clinics. This needs to be put at home. And that's not going to work unless we've got an IT infrastructure behind this that actually supports this idea of distributed device care. The other is in the area of collecting data that we can actually start to unlock some of the mysteries of how the brain works. We can actually make real progress in curing and preventing these diseases. So in our particular model, what we do is we do a stimulation session that lasts 20 minutes. But every time we treat a patient, we also take an EEG of that patient. Then we put that EEG into a database. So when we start to think about treating hundreds and thousands and 10,000s of patients, so not only are we making a meaningful impact in the lives of these patients, we're starting to build up what we believe will be the world's largest longitudinal database of electrophysiology data of the brain. We think that's going to start to enable a lot of people, pharmaceutical companies, universities, healthcare systems, to really start to unlock some of the data that's been locked up in sort of how do we really understand the brain. So, we're not going to cure brain disorders overnight. We're not going to cure them in 5 years. Say the students that are in universities studying neuroscience now may live long enough to see us cure brain disease. But that said, we're making some incredible progress in this area. I'd say, unlike in years past, the progress that we're making depends in large part on the work you people in this room are doing, in terms because the data is becoming increasingly important. So for that, I guess I commend you and I thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And again, Paul will be up at the top for a little bit while we wrap up our presentations.
Judy Murphy is Chief Nursing Officer at IBM Global Healthcare, where she is responsible for building relationships and expanding business across the healthcare industry by being a strategic advisor to clients and assisting in developing health IT solutions for providers to improve health and healthcare, lower costs, and ease clinical workload. Her work has been recognized with fellowship in the American Academy of Nursing, the American College of Medical Informatics, and HIMSS. She has received numerous awards, including the HIMSS 2018 20 Most Influential Women in Health IT. It's my pleasure to introduce Judy Murphy.
Okay, that's not my biggest claim to fame. My biggest claim to fame is I'm from Wisconsin. Grew up there, only moved to the DC area 6 years ago, so you know what kind of a fan I am. And it's not a Patriots fan, just saying. I had to say that, you know. We both have great teams, though. I know most of you are probably Patriots fan, and I've been a diehard Packer fan my whole life. My family does have season tickets and everything, so I had to kind of start out that way. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I know some of the speakers, they've been hard to hear for me because I was sitting in the back. Are we okay in the back? Okay, I tend to project, so hopefully that'll work. So my topic today is Beyond the Electronic Health Record, From Transformation to Reinvention. And what I thought we'd do is explore a little bit some of the things that are changing, particularly around industry, and that's not going to be a surprise to you. I'm going to just re-emphasize some things that you probably know. Then I'm going to go and talk a little bit about consumerism and how that's changing the expectations in healthcare. And then we'll pivot over and talk about what we're going to need to thrive in healthcare and thrive as a country, really, to change things. And I'm referring to that as digital intervention. And I'll introduce that concept and then talk about population health, patient engagement, and personalization, and cognitive computing, or AI. And I promise to have you out of here by 6 o'clock. Okay, I know, I'm only going till 5. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end, and if we don't, I'll be here for at least the first 10 minutes of the cocktail hour. I know I stand between you and I think they're having drinks, right? Okay, I'm getting the positive. All right, what's all changing in healthcare today? I'd like to think of it old healthcare, new healthcare. So if you look down the column on the left-hand side, you know, we've been in a fee-for-service model. We've been in a volume-based model. The more you do, the more you get paid for. Focusing on delivery. Traditionally, our insurance coverage has been employer-centric. Prices are unknown. You know, we continue to encourage people to walk through the doors of a clinic or a hospital. They don't really know how long it's going to take in order to be seen. They don't know how long they're going to be there. They don't know how much it's going to cost, and amazingly, they go anyway. There's been somewhat of a one-way dialogue and more of a transaction. In other words, you know, we sort of live our lives, and then we go see a doctor. And then we live our lives, and then maybe we have a colonoscopy. And then we live our lives, and then we go see a doctor. And usually when we go see a doctor, most often actually, it's because we need something, or we've got a pain, or, you know, maybe we're really good and we are going for our annual physicals, but, you know, you can each think about that yourself. My point being, though, it's very transactional. We don't think of health or wellness as really part of our lives. Our data is poor and disconnected. If I hear about this like one more time, you know, this is the theme these days. Everybody wants to be able to share the data, and we're just not getting there. And to a point, it's a little bit about the standards, but mostly it's about the way we practice. And mostly it's about, governance. And if we did, for example, accept a CCDA from somebody else, what do we do with it? Oh, we sort of package it up and put it over here, which would then require the practitioner who wants to look at it to get outside of their workflow and go look at that thing. And maybe it's 4 pages long, maybe it's 10 pages long, and what they really want to know is, why did this person go to the doctor 2 weeks ago? And that's sort of buried in that document. Traditionally, very few people are taking that data, decomposing it, and actually putting it in the electronic health record as real data. And for me, that's a struggle as well, because we need to be able to begin to trust each other. If you collected a blood pressure and you collected a blood pressure and I have blood pressures in my electronic health record, why don't we put them all on the flow sheet? Oh, and by the way, while we're doing that, maybe we should be thinking about taking the patient-generated data of blood pressures and putting it in the record too. And I'm not saying don't maintain the provenance of that, but understanding, in other words, where it came from. But it's kind of interesting that we continue to complain about it, and yet we're not actively doing much to change it. So we continue to have this sort of disconnected, islands of information. We react, again, typically we go to the doctor or we have something done to, for, or with us in a reactive kind of way. And we're pretty much trying to follow standards of care and evidence-based practice. Now, I'll contrast that on the right-hand side, and I'm not going to actually read down every single one of these, but when you think about it, we're moving to pay for performance, and that performance could be everything from a per member per month to manage that person's health, to more of a capitated kind of payment for an episode, or bundled payments around a particular situation. But it's dramatically changing. And the government went on record a few years ago as saying that by 2020, 50% of their payment for Medicare and Medicaid was going to be value-based. And they're on track to accomplish that. And even with the current administration, none of that has changed. And so I think we need to sit up and really start to think about that. So value and outcomes are becoming important. I'm going to talk a fair amount about this consumer-centric kind of idea later. Cost transparency. People are now starting to say, I wonder what that's going to cost, and I wonder what it costs here, and what it costs here, and what it costs here, and if they're the same amount. And because I'm traditionally now digging into my pocket to pay my portion of that, whether it's the copay or the deductible, or maybe it's just straight up out of pocket, people are, again, paying more attention. We're becoming more engaged in mobile as patients. We're becoming a bit more brand loyal. And basically that has to do with the fact that if we go to a place and it's easy and it's a bit unlike actually the traditional healthcare organization where maybe registration is easy and parking is easy and I don't have to wait longer than 10 or 15 minutes, that's going to create some brand loyalty for me. And I'll talk more about why that's become so important as we think about where healthcare is really transitioning. Because it doesn't just have to do with convenience and comfort and happiness. It also has to do with how we end up getting engaged. And when we get more engaged, we're going to have better outcomes traditionally. We're talking about big data, and I heard the speaker earlier, how big is our data really compared to some data? And so, maybe there's big data and there's little data, but we've got good data. We've been electronified. 98% of our hospitals and about 90% of our clinics now have electronic health records. So we have a data pool like we didn't have before. And if we want to do research, we don't have to go to the medical records area and pull records, right? We now have a plethora of information in these databases. So it's very different from what we had before. We're becoming more prescriptive and predictive, and we're looking at more personalization. And again, I'll talk about that a bit more later. So basically what I'm kind of summarizing here, for those of you who like something shorter and sweeter, we were going from a fee-for-service to a value-based. We're going from where we competed on volume with individual patients, where we treated patients who came to us, and we focused on acute episodic encounters. And what we're going to in the future is competing on outcomes, where we're treating the entire population, we're caring for everyone, And that becomes extremely important. We don't just treat the people we see. And in fact, in our future healthcare, the one that's creeping into our everyday lives now, it's not always about the people you're seeing and whether you're caring for them right. It's about the people you're not seeing, because those are the ones who might have the chronic conditions that aren't being treated. Those are the ones that might have the blood pressure that's going unchecked and unmedicated. So this future care for everyone becomes really important, and making sure that everybody's got a primary care practitioner becomes really important. And then, of course, we're focusing on health, wellness, and prevention. So the second big thing that's changing, in addition to sort of the overall landscape, is consumer expectations. And what's interesting about this is, I mentioned, because we're paying more out of pocket, because more than 50% of us have high deductible plans now, okay? I'll also tell you that the average that a person in the United States spends for health care out of their own pocket in 2017 was $9,600. So $9,600 per person. Now that includes premiums, that includes copays, that includes deductibles, and that includes straight up paying straight out of pocket. But again, it's causing everybody to kind of sit up and to care a bit more about, you know, what's going on here. And am I getting the value? I know I myself, I couldn't believe it. I had to go for rehab. I had a immobilized shoulder, and yeah, that's what they called it. And it was like, it hurts like heck, just we got to fix it. So I was going to rehab. And so I knew that my deductible was high and that I'd have to pay the majority of it out of pocket. So when I was checking in the first time, I said, I'm just going to be self-pay. And she goes, well, do you have insurance? And I said, yeah, I have insurance. And I said, but this isn't going to meet my deductible, so I just want to pay out of pocket. And she said, oh, no, we have to bill your insurance, and then, you know, you'll pay the whole amount. And I'm like, okay. So come to find out that if I would have been self-pay and not had insurance, I would have paid $125 per visit. Oh, no, because I had insurance, and even with my insurance, you know, reduced payment, I was paying $165 for every visit. And I mean, so next time I'm just going to lie is what I decided. But, you know, they had a special rate for self-pay people. Everybody's trying to figure this out, though, right? Exactly how is this going to work? And, you know, this out-of-pocket amount, this is exactly what everybody's talking about when they talk about the fact that, you know, it's just getting out of control. And the percent that we as Americans pay for health care is ridiculous. And everybody knows that, everybody believes it, and so they're starting to expect more when they do encounter the healthcare facility. And I know that I'm sitting there thinking, I have about a 50-minute visit. It's costing me $165 out of my pocket, and they're getting to me late? Excuse me? I expect to be seen on time, you know? Now, why are our expectations changing, okay? So a couple of the bullets on the right-hand side of this slide, I want to draw your attention to the fourth bullet down, self-service and online engagement. So it turns out we've all become used to the way things are these days, right? And how are the things the way they are? Well, we can text people and get responses generally immediately, right? If we need to take a ride from point A to point B, we can call up the Uber app and get somebody almost immediately. If we need to order something, we go on Amazon and we're immediately ordering. We've got used to this very self-service oriented life and very immediate, like we get immediate gratification. Healthcare's kind of been the outlier on that, right? But I feel the impatience with that beginning to bubble. You may feel it yourself. I certainly feel it. I myself have walked out of a couple of places. I went to the eye doctor about a year ago, and I had gone, it was the same eye doctor I had gone to for 5 years. I walked in, they gave me a blank form to fill out. I said, oh no, you don't understand. I've been here before. All I need to do is update the information that you already have on me. And she goes, well, that's not how we do it. You know, you have to fill out a new form. And I said, well, then I'm not going to be getting my services here anymore. And I walked out. And I don't think I'm unique. Well, maybe I am, because I have high expectations. But I'm guessing some of you are like me. And so the point really is, we're starting to be impatient with the traditional healthcare organization. And second last bullet, seamless, frictionless experiences are beginning to be anticipated. You know, it's kind of funny. Starbucks is really a good example. Some of you, I'm sure, travel internationally as well as in the United States, and you can walk into a Starbucks anywhere, and you know how it works, right? I mean, you go and you order, and you go where the little light is hanging, and that's where you pick it up. And it may be crowded, but you know they're organized, and you know you're going to get taken care of relatively quickly. So, you know, you stand in line, but it's a predictable experience and generally seamless. Now, I'll contrast that when you walk into a clinic. Well, first you have to figure out where to park when you go to the clinic, and that's not always easy, especially in some of our cities, you know, where the parking might be far away, and then we try to resolve that with valet parking. But then you walk in, and you don't really see a check-in desk, or maybe you see a check-in desk, but that's not really the check-in desk, that's the information desk, and they tell you got to walk, you know, 2 hallways down and turn right, and then there'll be your check-in desk. We don't even make it easy. We don't make it predictable, and we don't do it the same. So a patient who might visit 3 or 4 clinics in the same organization, they don't all run the same. Where you check in and how you do everything is different. And again, that's what we got to start looking at when we start thinking about meeting the needs of our new and changing consumers. And I'm going to talk a fair amount about patient engagement and self-care and how that fits into population health. So I'll skip over that one right now. I've mentioned some of these you know, experiences already, but our consumer experiences are forever changing what we expect. And our next best experience is got to be better than the last one we had. And so we are definitely starting to look at, you know, the Amazon, the Uber, the Starbucks, the Nordstrom phenomena, and begin to expecting that in other parts of our lives. And when I say we, I mean we, all of us who experience healthcare, not just us as providers, but us as the receivers of healthcare. So this whole idea of consumer experience becomes relatively important. IT adoption has certainly reached a tipping point. Technology is getting better, faster, cheaper, and consumers are expecting it. So we're getting new business models for delivering healthcare services with more choice. What's a good example of that? Quick cares, right? Urgent cares. We're bringing the healthcare out to the people. How many people have gone to a quick care at CVS or Walgreens or somewhere in the last year? Yeah, half of you. And why? It was convenient, and it was predictable, and it was like every other retail experience you have, right? You drive up, you park in a normal parking lot, you walk into a place that does retail sales, and you're treated like a customer. You check in with the kiosk, it tells you how long you're going to have to wait. It maybe even tell you, gee, you know, we've got a 20-minute wait. You might want to go 2 blocks down where there's another CVS because they have no wait. You know, so we're looking for those kinds of things, and that's the new business models. Of course, the other business models that are changing is this sort of consolidation and convergence of healthcare organizations. So what I mean by that is we've got clinics and hospitals merging. We've got payers and providers merging. We've got CVS partnering with Aetna. We've got Anthem buying healthcare provider organizations. So this whole idea that there was a payer and there was a provider and that was pretty much it, other than maybe your employer who participated by paying some of the money. Now this is getting all jumbled up, and we've got on-site clinics at certain large employers. We've got places like Amazon and Google starting to lead the way in terms of how they're approaching healthcare for their employees. We've got these consolidations taking place where multiple businesses are coming together, like the Berkshire Hathaway one, where they're banding together and looking at healthcare for all of their employees in a different way. So these are really, exciting changes. Second bullet talks about the self-service again. Third bullet talks about this retail. We're beginning to look at healthcare a bit more like retail. I'm excited to think that more people are going to start to identify that you can look up quality scores on healthcare facilities and on healthcare providers, because again, that further accentuates the idea that you have choice and that you have some control over your healthcare. And then again, last but not least, and I kind of said this already, this seamless, frictionless experience. So in order to thrive, as I mentioned earlier, healthcare organizations really need to be thinking about not just what is now being referred to as the legacy EHR. I never thought I'd be saying those words, legacy EHR. But the Cerners, the Epics, the Meditechs, the Allscripts are being looked at as legacy systems now. And I say that mostly because nobody likes them, but everybody puts up with them. So it's become this sort of thing that we know we have to do, but what do we do to make it better? And that's a bit what I'm going to be talking about. This idea, and I'll use the next slide really, the EHR is in, and I know in my career, I thought getting the electronic health record in was the hard part. And you know, I mean, I really did. I did 15 hospitals on Cerner back between 1995 and 2005, and I honestly thought it was going to take my life. You know, it was like, whoa, this is difficult. And we were doing clinics and hospitals. Actually, we did 15 hospitals, 120 clinics, and I came to find out that when that was all done, that was the easy part. Getting people to use it and actually reaping the benefits from the electronic health record, turns out that's the harder part. And Sushade was talking earlier about, you know, people who are putting in electronic health records and then going, okay, we're done, and they're getting rid of all of their informatics people. Yeah, good luck with that. Because my guess is that they're completely unclear or oblivious to the fact that this digital transformation actually is a second wave of work. And it really doesn't come automatically when you're putting in the EHR. It's additional work typically that has to be done afterwards. And it does require a good amount of work, making sure that all the people who are using the system not only understand how to use it, but they understand all the shortcuts and they're using it to the maximum benefit. And that's just the EHR optimization. Then there's the analytics on the data that you're now collecting. There's the mobile apps and the use of the patient portal. There's maybe getting into telehealth. So that whole digital transformation component is what gets done kind of on top of the EHR. And I think about that as that transformation stage. And then what I think many of us are moving into now is this digital reinvention age. And this is where we're actually starting to think outside the walls of our facilities, outside the walls of where we've implemented the electronic health record. So getting out of the clinics and the primary care facilities and the acute care facilities, and really starting to think about how do we change health wellness in the country for us and for our people who are coming after us. And this is where the pop health management, cognitive computing, personalization, and precision medicine really start coming in. I'd be hard-pressed to say that any of those four things are going to be done right within the electronic health record. Now, I'm not telling you that the vendors aren't going to say that they can, and maybe some of them can. But I am saying that it's not considered one of the traditional functions of the electronic health record. And in fact, I'm looking at them as really the next phase and probably being done with additional kinds of tools and systems that get worked on within the ecosystem of the systems that we need. And yeah, they have to interplay in some cases with the electronic health record, but the electronic health record was really setting the base in the first two phases, and now we're starting to look at what else do we need to do. So, population health management is the first thing I want to talk about in this category. Population health management, it turns out, you know, a lot of people listen to that term and they think it means running reports. You know, it's looking at your population and understanding the incidence of cancer and understanding the incidence of high blood pressure. And while there's a component of report writing and retrospective looking to pop health, the key word here really is management. And it basically has to do with understanding your population so that you can manage your population. And again, here what we're talking about are not always the people that are standing in front of us, but it's the people who we haven't seen, okay? So why are some healthcare organizations good at doing this and others aren't? Well, this diagram, first of all, I think points out some really interesting points. So on the left-hand side, turns out that what makes us healthy is 50% of healthy behaviors. Okay, so that is everything, that's the social determinants of health, if you will. It's where you live, it's your access to green space for exercise, it's your ability to exercise or desire to exercise, it's the way you eat, it's access to clean water. So there's lots of things there, but it's 50% of what actually contributes to our health and wellness. And then there's an environmental component, there's a genetic component, and it turns out access to care is actually only about 10% of what makes up us being healthy. Now, interestingly, in the US, if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, we spend 88% of what we spend in healthcare on access and medical services, and very little on the healthy behaviors and the environment and genetics. So you can see how this has really got a flip-flop when we start to think about prevention and population health management. And I'll explain that a bit more on the next slide. So this is a population health management model that I've been using for years. And turns out the first time I used it when I came to IBM, a guy came up to me after the talk and he said, "Thanks for using my diagram." He goes, "You know, that's my diagram, I built that." And I'm like, wow, really? I mean, I love this diagram. Like I said, I've been using it for years. And I said, "Well, what's your background?" And he goes, "I'm a rocket scientist." And I say that because I hope it doesn't actually take a rocket scientist to understand this, because of course we all talk about that, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. Maybe it does. But I'm going to try to explain it to you in a way that you'll understand without being rocket scientists. So if we take the entire population, which is the cloud on the top, and divide it up into segments, turns out there's really 4 segments that we try to think about and manage in pop health. On the left-hand side, we've got the low risk or the healthy individual, represents, depending on the city, depending on the state, depending on the environment, 40 to 60% of that population. If you go to the next one to the right, 20 to 25% of people are at risk. Now, the at risk could be because of the environment they're in, it could be genetics, it could be age. I've got a little 60 plus there. Bad things happen when you start turning 60, no matter what you do, trust me on that one. And it could be that you're overweight, it could be that you don't have access to good food, fresh vegetables, those kinds of things, but that's the at-risk population. They don't have chronic disease, but they're at risk of developing it. Next column over, we've got the chronic disease. That's 5 to 15% of our population, and these then are the people that have to have active chronic disease that has to be managed. Okay, and then last but not least, on the far right-hand side, 2 to 3% of the population where people are in active disease and they're hospitalized. Now, of note, at the bottom of those far 2 right-hand columns, about 20% of the population drives 80% of the cost today. And that goes back to that previous chart, right? We're spending lots of money on sick people, and we're not spending any money on the low-risk people or the at-risk people. And that's what I'm sure you've been hearing has been starting to change, that insurance companies, employers, and providers are really all starting to focus on making sure that we either keep people on the left-hand side of this chart or that we, in fact, get them there by changing behaviors and changing some of the things that have put them into the chronic condition category. And of course, we're absolutely trying to keep them out of the hospital. Now, again, I've got the costs listed there. I've got the engagement listed there. How do you engage with those types of individuals? And what kind of outreach do you actually use? And again, those 2 far right-hand columns require people, require active case management. But the people on the left usually can be handled with texting and emailing, reminders, and those kinds of things. But we have to spend some, money over there. Now, let me give you a personal example. When I moved from Wisconsin to Washington, D.C., I had to switch insurances, and I went from a traditional provider where, quite frankly, I kind of flew under the radar. didn't always go into the doctor for my preventive stuff every year. I was feeling good, so I kind of thought, why should I bother spending money? Now, I'll contrast that. When I moved to DC, I became a Kaiser member. And Kaiser isn't the only one who does this well. It just happens to be my personal example. So I signed up for Kaiser, and I get the email that says you have to pick a primary care provider. And I'm like, yeah, I'm busy. I'm in a new job. Got a second email, got a third email. Basically, the fourth email said, you have to pick a primary care provider, and if you don't pick one, somebody will pick one for you. We'll pick one for you. And I thought, okay, I'm motivated. I don't really want them picking my doctor. So, and this all happened, by the way, in the first month. This wasn't like it was over a long period of time. So I picked a primary care provider, and what happened the next day is that primary care provider sent me an email listing out all the things based on my age and sex that I should have had in the last 1 to 2 years, and it included everything, including the dreaded colonoscopy, but it was, mammography, and it was screening for diabetes and screening for high blood pressure, and I was like, whoa. And, I wasn't the best at scheduling, so then I got followed up with the phone call. You got to schedule these things. Now, they were all preventive. And they did say if you have actually had them in the last year or two, all you have to do is get us the result, and then we'll, check the box, if you will. I hadn't had any of the stuff, so I did have to have it all over. And the first time that I saw that primary care practitioner, I said to her, what is your motivation? You guys are so strong on following up with individuals to make sure. Now, pause here. Remember when I said in our new model, you're managing everybody? In the old model, you only manage the people that came to you? Okay, so this is different. They're managing everybody because I got attached to this primary care practitioner's panel, and now this primary care practitioner was responsible for my outcomes. And that's exactly what she replied back to me. She said, I'm responsible for your outcomes. My incentive, so she's aligned to incentives, my incentive is at least a 90% mammogram rate, a 90% colonoscopy rate for my panel of patients. Now, think about how that aligns things as we look at this chart and keeping people on the left-hand side of the chart. This is what we're not necessarily doing in all of our healthcare organizations. We haven't migrated really to this new kind of a model yet, and this idea of having an assigned primary care practitioner or at least a medical home, right? A patient-centered medical home, maybe it's a team of people and not an individual practitioner. But this idea that you're counted, you're in the denominator of what's expected so that the population health model not only can be measured, but can be intervened on. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so if you got confused at all, I did have a separate chart that's much more simplistic, and basically the healthy well on the left-hand side and the active disease on the right-hand side, and you can see the corresponding health status as it goes down, the spending as it goes up, and again, what we're really trying to do is keep people on the left-hand side of this chart. Either move them there or keep them there if they're already there. That's the whole concept of the model. It does not have to do with just running reports. Okay, it has to do with actively managing people and making sure that everybody is getting all the right preventive things. Interesting concept, right? That a big change in what I think many of us have traditionally thought about. Now, how do we get that done? People don't necessarily spend their entire lives in our healthcare organizations. Of course they don't. And that's why patient engagement becomes so important, because we have to get the people engaged to take care of themselves in between the encounters with the healthcare organizations. That's how patient engagement fits in, and that's why personalization is so important, because we migrate toward personalization. So the idea here is that we're looking to know the person, to get them engaged, and to get them empowered. Another personal story, this I think exemplifies this point just perfectly. So my husband has high blood pressure. He's had it for about 10 years. And about a year ago, he was going for his annual exam, and he looks at me, and we're standing in the kitchen. I don't know, there's something significant that he was like a little bit away from me. And he looks at me and says, I'm going to the doctor next week. I better start watching my diet and my salt intake. Now, it's an interesting concept. It's like flossing the day you go to the dentist, right? 0 chance of success. The hygienist is going to know you haven't been flossing for the last 6 months. Just like in his case, it was as if this was about the doctor and not about him. It was as if healthcare was out there, and like I was saying earlier, you know, you live your life and then you go healthcare, live your life, healthcare. We don't think of healthcare as being part of our lives, and that's what we have to change. And that's what we're trying to really accomplish with patient engagement, is for everybody to truly identify how important it is, in fact, to embrace this health and wellness, and not just from the concept of, you know, exercising and eating well, but going to the doctor, having the preventive things, taking care of yourself. And by the way, if you have high blood pressure, you check your blood pressure a couple of times a week, right? And, you know, we had a blood pressure cuff at home. It was actually sitting out on the counter in the kitchen. And I should have like moved it around to see if he was actually using it, which I didn't. But it's interesting to think that that's the culture change that we're trying to create with patient engagement. It's this concept that health is not out there, health is in here. And that in order for any of this to be successful, it's not about just going to the doctor, it's about how you live your life. And that's a challenge for us in healthcare. Now, I've pointed out some, what I would call more advanced concepts of this in the red boxes here. Under the Engage Me, this idea that you know, we're actually using shared decision making, we're actually using collaborative care planning. Maybe in an acute care facility, we're doing walking rounds. There's no secret. And on the right-hand side, we're demystifying, we're simplifying, we're making it easy for them to act. And that feeds into this whole consumerism thing. If I make it easy, people are more likely to do it. And if they're more likely to do it, they're more likely to be empowered. So this is really an important concept as we start to think about where we want to take healthcare in the future, is getting people to identify that they have to be part of it. Now, engagement also matters for the clinical reasons on the right-hand side, but it also matters, there's a dollars and cents thing here. There's a marketing component here too. In other words, if we have good patient experience and we've got good engagement of our patients, they actually will brag about their experiences, and it certainly helps build loyalty, it builds brand loyalty to you, it optimizes engagement opportunities. So it creates this nice, you know, we're in this together, we're partners. It's not about you do this and I do that and I'll see you once a year, bye, kind of thing. Okay, so engagement has some marketing components as well as clinical components. And it's exactly why in many of our organizations, there's a chief experience officer, there's a chief digital officer, there's a chief marketing officer, and those people work together along with all the chief clinical officers, both medical and nursing, to actually make this happen. Again, does that make sense? Okay. So getting into this last and sort of fifth component is around cognitive. So data is the new currency. I think we've heard about that on a couple of different points throughout the day today. But the concept here is that the world almost revolves around the data now, because that's how we have our clinical decision support. I don't know why the S ended up underneath there, but clinical decision support, analytics, and action around the data. And that's what we're going to use for our pop health. So that's how we define the population. We identify the segments. We stratify the risks. We then engage the patients. If they're on the high risk side, we're going to actually have people intervening with them, as compared to if they're on the lower risk side, we're probably going to reach out electronically and using some of our tools that can help close care gaps. In other words, again, once you have a panel of patients, you can actually run a report that says, you know, give me a list of all the women over 45 who haven't had a mammogram in the last year who are in my panel. So that you can start looking for those care gaps and reaching out to those individuals. And everybody on the left-hand side cares about that. Certainly the providers, but also the payers and the clinical integrated networks and anybody working in home care, because we want to understand what's going on with that individual and work as a team to intervene with them. Now, the other reason cognitive becomes important is this concept that we've got a lot of stuff electronified, and we now want to understand the care that we're providing and understand from a personalized level the care that individuals need. This is a chart that we've used at IBM. We've got the Watson symbol in the middle there, AI, cognitive computing. It doesn't have to be Watson, of course. It could be any AI. But the idea here is that analytics, when you're using cognitive, spans both knowledge and data. Okay, so the knowledge is on the left-hand side. The knowledge comes from our medical literature, our guidelines, our institutional knowledge. That's where our evidence comes from. So if Watson was going to recommend a diagnosis or a treatment for oncology, it can look at all of that knowledge and come forward with the best choice. But what does it really need to make the best choice for an individual? It needs the data on the right-hand side. Now that's where the individual is standing, and I will tell you that the data that we have in our electronic health records are in her feet. That's about 10% of what we need to know about a person to actually treat them well. That's why so many people and so many organizations are spending time collecting and pulling data from other sources to understand those both genetics as well as those social determinants or exogenous data. The other stuff, where do they live? You've probably heard that, many large cities, you can be in one zip code and you can move 1 or 2 zip codes over and your duration of living goes down 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or goes up. And it has to do with the exogenous data. It has to do with the environment within which that individual is actually living. And so it's really important if we're going to treat the person holistically to understand all of that. And I throw that into cognitive because I don't think without cognitive and AI kinds of tools that we're actually going to be able to do the right blending of the data on the right and the knowledge on the left to actually get that personalized therapy. And again, it's not just genomics. There's more to it than that. Genomics makes up a component of that. But what we know typically in our clinical data today, again, is just that episodic encounter-based data that does not give us the whole picture. So really important to pull this all together and for the good of the patient and getting the best diagnosis. So in starting to wrap up, the vision that I see, and I think a lot of people see, is that we're going to be able to get the quadruple aim, better health, managed costs, and best patient and provider experience by enabling analytics through pop health management as well as cognitive insights. So sort of my dream, if you look at the chart, we've got the person in the center, and sometimes the person is a patient. Sometimes the person is a beneficiary. Sometimes they're a consumer, and sometimes they're an employer. But we need to treat our employee, but we need to treat them holistically, right? So we need to think about everything and probably partner with the employer, the provider, and the payer to actually make this all happen, to actually change the way we think about and deliver healthcare in this country. So some of the things around the outside using technology and services are the things that we need to do: enable wellness, personalized interventions, change behavior, et cetera. So I believe, summarizing with the 3 bullets, a comprehensive view of the individual and the population using clinical, social, and other key determinants of health are required. We need personalized care at scale. Today we do that in isolated circumstances, but not writ large throughout our organizations, and engaging the patients as individuals. And then population health management to actually manage the health and wellness and care for an individual across the population and across the continuum of their life. And that's how I like to think about it now. It's not the continuum of care. It's not just the episodes where they interact with our organization, but it's the continuum of life. So instead of I live, I go, I live, I go, it's I live and go. Okay, all is one. And this is going to require a culture change, but I'm confident that with all the electronic tools and things that we have, that we're going to be able to do that. So just to sum up, I talked about 2 things that were big changes, how the industry is changing and how consumerism is on the rise, and then this digital reinvention concept, changing the model of care to population health management, really thinking about patient engagement and personalization, and the use of cognitive computing. And so in the words of Yogi Berra, even though we're at a football venue, the future ain't what it used to be. And I think the next 5-10 years is just going to be dramatically different as we start to think about the way we provide and provide care to and service our patients. And I thank you for your attention. All right, we do actually have time.
We do.
Yes,
have time.
for a few questions, comments.
Questions?
Are the drinks out yet?
Almost.
I first want to make a comment and then ask a question. It is my insight that the adoption of the cloud by healthcare providers especially is at a slower rate than many other industries, in spite of the fact that Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google.
IBM. We have a cloud too. Okay.
And IBM Watson
Just had to get
Cloud
us in there. Okay.
and IBM are participating in this field. So I was wondering if you have any insight on how to accelerate the adoption of the cloud by healthcare providers for both, clinical data or clinical workloads as well as other workloads.
Sure. I think everybody heard the question, even though I didn't talk about cloud in my talk. I got asked a question about it. Luckily, I know the answer. I don't really know the answer. I think, healthcare lags behind in a lot of things, and I believe we are lagging behind in cloud for many reasons. One of them is the HIPAA compliant cloud. So that has not been something that has been as available as the regular cloud was. So HIPAA compliant cloud at all the vendors that you mentioned came after the regular cloud, so they weren't even positioned to take personal health information. So that's one reason. The second reason is the majority and a lot of our computing is done by those legacy vendors who are not cloud enabled. I mean, they're just beginning to talk about migrating to the cloud. So if you were going to move to the cloud, traditionally it would have been, in the last couple of years, it would have been in some of your other systems, not your electronic health record. Now, there's a couple exceptions to that, right? That's why Athena Health is on the rise right now. You've probably heard that. In the last year, their market share is going up and up because they were cloud-enabled from the get-go. That's how they were built. eClinicalWorks was the same thing. So I think we're going to catch up, but I think we were behind for those kind of two important reasons. I know our experience when we go into a healthcare organization, well, in the United States, people are willing to host data or systems on a cloud that's outside their organization. It doesn't have to be on-prem. But when you go around the world, many of our healthcare organizations are run by the government, and the government in many countries doesn't want it being in the United States or off-prem. And so, it was more of the hybrid cloud or the local cloud, if you will, as compared to the big cloud. And the benefits correspondingly, decrease a bit when you're not using shared services, for example. So I think that's a third reason. But I think it's going to catch up. I think, again, the next 2-3 years, and it's going to all be a wash. Yeah.
Other questions?
Oh, come on. The drinks aren't out yet, I don't think.
No? Oh, here.
Oh, one more.
So you gave a lot of wonderful predictions, and you seem to have a lot of optimism about the future. For us older people, do you think a lot of these things will happen in our lifetimes? Because, you know...
You might have heard that better than me. Ask the question again, because I think I actually missed the essence of it.
Okay, so you are very optimistic about the future. You know, talking about how great things are going to be and all. And I want to know, for us older people, is it going to happen in our lifetimes?
Oh,
are
God,
we going to
yes.
get to benefit from it?
Yes.
Yes?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah, I'm just speaking for me, not you.
Yes. So it's interesting in that a lot of what's happening now with aging in place, you've heard that concept? Okay, so aging in place is basically allowing people to stay in their homes or their apartments as compared to sending them or taking them to a nursing home. And how that's being enabled basically is through sensor technology and through communication technology that older people can actually use or be involved with that doesn't require passwords and the stuff that they absolutely hate, right? So that's allowing a lot more people to stay independent for a lot longer, and that's already beginning now. So by the time we're old, assuming, I used to think old was 30. I mean, it's really sad, isn't it? You know, and then I thought it was 40, and then I thought it was 50, and now definitely 80. 80 is old. What's interesting about it is around the world. So we were actually talking about this at lunch today, that, you know, there were cultures around the world where having your elderly parents or grandparents live with you was the way it worked. You know, the family stayed together, and the family was there to take care of the elder as they aged. But that's changing. Even in countries like China and Japan, where it was very strong, the younger generation doesn't necessarily want to do that anymore. So some of this advancing of sensors and technology is actually happening outside the United States, because they don't want to put people in homes, but they don't want them living with the traditional family situation either. So they're trying to see ways. And we're involved in a project, for example, in Japan. It's called Japan Post, and it's a really exciting thing. So postal workers don't have any mail to deliver anymore, because none of us use, well, we use some mail. Let's say mail is decreased significantly. And so they're taking their postal workers and having them out checking on elderly who have been given iPads. And the iPads are for communicating with their family, but it's also for ordering, and then the delivery, you know, happens automatically to their house. So I think we're going to see more and more of those kinds of things where we're using technology to fill that communication and that gap of how do you do things and how do you know everything's okay in an elder person's home. I mean, my mom's 92, and I call her not every day, but pretty much every day. And the reason I don't is she doesn't remember that I called the day before anyway. And so I tell her I did even when I didn't. I'm teasing. I would never do that. But it's kind of interesting how what's important, you know, changes, and how you connect changes. And I can see there being simple applications that they could use on a simple tool like an iPad that would really help keep that connectiveness. Because of course you're obviously worried about safety and nutrition, but you're also worried about social interaction. And so how do they get that social interaction? Okay? Done and done? He's busy. I think we're done. Nobody else is raising their hand. Thank you.
Thanks again, Judy, for that thought-provoking closing. That was wonderful. So what I'll say is I heard Pat's question a little bit differently. I heard, is she old? And absolutely not. So that's the way that I heard that question. My name is Tim Wong. I'm the incoming president of New England HIMSS Chapter, and two immediate observations is that I'm not as tall as I think I am, and I've never seen myself simulcast before, so really, really weird. But first and foremost, I want to turn your direction to Matt Bornstein. I think he did a fantastic job. He's our leader of the New England Chapter. Through his leadership and stewardship, and he really kept us going and emceed a fantastic event today, so thank you, Matthew. Thank you to the audience. If you look around, thank you for hanging out. We hit 348 registrants today, and this is our third year here, and every year it's gone up. So I think we've hit capacity. What's going to happen is we're going to have to be on the field, and we'll have to have tents there. So, but we filled the room, and it's so great, and every year it's getting bigger and bigger. Thank you to our sponsors. So almost north of 40 sponsors here. So without the sponsors around the table, we wouldn't be able to have events here, especially in these incredible venues. So thank you to our sponsors. They really help us provide and put venues out here like this with all these educational venues. So thank you, sponsors. And thank you to the board and the volunteers. We do this because we love healthcare. That's that common thread. We do this because we have a passion for it. We want to use technology and informatics to really improve the patient experience. So, and we do this because we love it, and we're a volunteer-based organization. So thank you to the board and the volunteers that helped us put this event together. So a few more housekeeping things before I get into the fun. Once again, the presentations will be mailed to all the attendees. Please complete your membership survey when it gets sent out to you, because it really drives what we want to put out there. We really listen to the membership, and we try to put on events that resonate with the audiences and with the people that are out there that come to our events. A few more events that I'd like to mention, and it was mentioned earlier this morning, but just to punctuate that there is a Better Health Conference. It's put together by our friends over at the Connecticut Partners for Health, and that's June 7th. It's an all-day event. There's some information on your tables about it, and the keynotes of that day is ePatient Dave along with Danny Sands. So if you haven't seen that duo talk, they're incredible, and for that reason alone, please go to that event. We also have a joint social and networking event that we're in the midst of planning. And what we'd like to do is collaborate with the Rhode Island chapter of ECHE and have an event where it's a networking, it's a social, it's sort of a very intimate type of setting, and we're looking to do something like that in July 18th. All right, and that's going to be in Rhode Island, East Greenwich. So the last thing is it's prize time. So what I'd like to do is bring up Amy. And we had a fantastic showing with all of you going to the sponsors, so thank you for visiting the sponsors. Looks like we have a lot of people that participated and a lot of winners, so I'm going to draw two. Blindfolded.
Don't cheat.
Okay. The first winner, and these two prizes the prizes are sponsored by the New England chapter, is Sashi Chaparwal. I think I saw a hand there. Great, please come on up. So the prize is a $100 Amazon gift card. The second prize goes to Joe Heyman. If you're here, raise your hand.
All right, and I'll just get started. If all of the sponsors who are participating in the vendor raffle could please line up to the left. They have some really great prizes to give out today. I'll go first. I'm not with Queen Consulting, but unfortunately they had to get out of here a little bit early, but they did give me their winner. The winner of a $100 gift card from Queen Consulting is Ariella Steen from Tufts.
So as you can see, we have an impressive receiving line here. So what we're going to do is just allow the sponsors to come up one by one and announce the winners, and each sponsor will just come up and do the drawing. That's all right.
So this is from Versatile. These are some wireless Beats 3. And the first, if she is here, is Naomi Smith from Boston Pain. Right. Oh, I have alternates here, yeah. Naomi Smith. Okay. Therese Walsh.
All right, so I'm Dean Boyd with Atos Digital Healthcare Consulting. I've had the pleasure of joining this conference for the last few years now at Gillette Stadium, so I've heard how great the Patriots have been the last few years. So I was kind enough to bring a Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles jersey here today. It's okay, I'll be happy to know I have a reservation at Lincoln Financial Field on Sunday, and I'll say hi to the Lombardi Trophy for you. For the winner of the jersey, I have Jeff Mealy, Instamed. And by the way, only Philadelphia people put their cards in.
Hey everybody, my name is Ted Wilson with Qualcomm Life, also known as Capsule. I've got a Amazon Fire TV streaming device, and the first name is Laura Ritter Cox. All right.
Hello, I'm Greg Ficus with Cornerstone Advisors Group. Thanks to New England HIMSS for letting us sponsor this year. We have a $100 gift card that goes to Amy Chaco.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm with CloudWave, and we provide infrastructure for healthcare, cloud-based. And I've got a pair of wireless headphones, Bose. The winner is Carlton Gebhard.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Demerit with Oxford Global Resources, and I have a football jersey, too. This one's a little different, right? The winner is Tasia Ba from Partners Healthcare.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Scanlon from iOvations. I have a pair of Red Sox roof box tickets, a game against the Cleveland Indians. Scott Pilates of Reliant.
Hey, good afternoon. Matt Dearborn with Trinesis. So we're the first time attendees here, but we do partner with Mount Auburn and Steward Healthcare down in Boston. Just real quick, so basically we're a technology company based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and really partner with healthcare and hospital systems for all of their legacy data migration and archival needs. So through our Clearview, historical record viewer. So if you guys have any challenges surrounding legacy data, give us a shout. I have a $100 gift card, which is probably the only thing you guys wanted to hear from me. But, so the first one, Lorena Mandozzi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Ritchie with Lighthouse Health. Thank you, New England HIMSS, for having this again at a great venue. I have a $100 gift certificate or card, and the winner is Matt DiNapoli. Tufts.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Charles Dowd. I'm with Gigamon. We do network visibility and security, and we have a Nest Cam Pro here. The person that was picked out of the hat was Jason Maiques. Still here? He left. So I got to go to my option 2. Number 2, Leanne Roof. All righty. I got to pick another one? Okay. I can always just eat.
So we'll go with one of the bingo winners since the first 2 were not here.
Oh, you got to read the name. I can't read that.
Is it Dorothy LeConte?
I can't read it. Yeah,
Dorothy?
can't read the handwriting.
I had a little bit of trouble with the handwriting.
I'm killing it up here.
From K-Force, Dorothy.
Okay, we're just gonna, should I pick another one? All right, we're going again. Oh my God.
Did you get that one?
What does that say? Someone from Beth Israel?
Laura Ritton Cox.
All righty.
There you go.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Pete Broman from HealthCatalyst. Representing a proud Echo show. Irene Chen from Boston Children's.
Good afternoon. Nick Jesse from Wolf & Company. And we have a $100 Amex gift card for Ariella Stein. I think that table's rigged. Table's rigged.
Wow, that's the rowdy table back there. I should give them, they get the beer cup. Maybe we should raffle off the beer cup. Michael Ronan with Lenovo Health. I have a Lenovo Tab 4 10-inch tablet, and it's going to Rebecca Lee from, come on, really? You won the beer cup too, so I might as well just give you the beer cup.
I'm Gail Lineberry from InterSystems, and we have a $50 Amazon card, and it goes to Therese Walsh from Hebrew Senior Life. And if you're going to stay, do stop by our booth. We're going to have the Patriots ring for pictures today.
How's it going, everyone? Aaron Matson with ServiceNow, and I've got a Target gift card for a 3-time winner, Ariella Stein.
Hi, everyone. Mark Sampson with SailPoint. We're giving away a Fitbit. And for second-time winner tonight, Carlton Gephardt.
Hi, I'm John Pantano from Philips Health here again, and I have a repeat winner also. We have a $100 Amazon gift card, and it's going to Lorena Mendoza. Or Mendozi, sorry.
Hello, I'm Mike Perillo with Connection. We have a $50 gift card, which I'll be emailing you. It's a Visa card. Winner is Amy Chaco.
How you doing today? My name's Sam. My colleague is with Add-On Data. I'm with Altus Medical IT Cards. My other colleague that's with us today is Jeff Reardon from Code. And thank you for having us here today. I thought I'd get your attention, talk a little bit louder, because we like to forecast, right? So, you know, it's interesting. We had about 1,000 people stop by and drop their cards in our hat today. And the one that we chose, that's taken out of the hat, was Ariella Stein.
I'm going to have you come pick one.
Hi, my name is Terry Matichek with Sirius Healthcare. Tim, as one of his first official acts, is going to pick the winner for this Fitbit Versa. Great activity. Thanks, everybody, for coming by the booth today. So from Beth Israel Deaconess, Laura Ritter. Is that her again? So Laura must have bent her card a certain way that caused the pick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric, and I'm from the Massachusetts eHealth Collaborative. We have a booth back there in the back, just in case you haven't had a chance to stop by, but thank you if you did. And we have a $200 gift card to thelobsterguy.com. And the winner is Nancy Barazano. And the next winner is Marissa Leone.
So I don't know about you, but probability, that just doesn't happen. So anyone at that table, it's a Thursday, I think there's a lottery somewhere. Buy my ticket if you don't mind. Hang in there for a few more minutes. We've got cocktail hour sponsored by Oracle. So Melissa and David, if you could come up and say a few words. Thank you for sponsoring the cocktail hour. And Melissa is the immediate past president of the New England HIMSS chapter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. About 13 years ago, Oracle embarked on this journey to build a complete modern cloud suite of products. And by Oracle, I mean Larry Ellison. As Larry gets older, surprisingly, healthcare becomes more and more an initiative for him to think about and work on. So Oracle spends about $6 billion a year innovating on products. And we built a complete suite, which includes the financial applications, the HR applications, the procurement applications, as well as the material management applications. And we'd love the opportunity to engage with you and help you educate you on these products.
Thank you, David. And what's interesting is that there's some AI built into it, real-time data analytics, which we talked about today, and chatbots. So it's kind of cool technology, and it resonates with a lot of us today. Also wanted to say that my friend Dr. Dirk Stanley said today earlier, he's like, healthcare IT people are really cool. So let's go have fun and have a cool time out there having cocktails. So thank you, everyone. And I just want to say, maybe Dean Boyd's wife, we should get her name, because we might have to send him home in a body bag for that whole Eagles shirt thing. I'm just saying, so. Anyway, you Patriots fans know what I mean, right? So thanks again, and great job, everyone.
One more sponsor, so one more minute. I'd like to invite Gail from InterSystems. So they're sponsoring the showing of the Super Bowl ring tonight, which is a fantastic piece, a real capstone for today. And everything will be out there, so we're going to have a great view of the field. So Gail, could you please come up?
Well, I know I'm the only thing standing between you and your cocktails and the ring. So I just wanted to, for those who don't know who we are, we provide the engine that powers the world's most important applications. There's 500 million patients that touch our software every day. We have a new offering called Iris, which is a database that has both structured and unstructured data that will support sharding. Our folks are over there. If anybody needs any information, please stop by, and would love to see you at the Patriots ring section. Have a really nice cocktail hour.
Okay, that concludes the formalities. Let's enjoy the cocktails and some conversation. Thank you so much for a great event today.